Chapter 496. A murder had occurred in the office of the Chamberlain of Dependencies, and it involved the death of an envoy from the Qi Kingdom. This was a serious matter, and all unrelated personnel, including the envoys of the various countries, were barred from entering the building. Aside from the personnel handling the case, no one was allowed to enter or leave. They could only poke their heads out and peek into the building from afar. They saw the envoys of the Qi Kingdom standing in the courtyard. The men from the Supreme Court and the Ministry of Justice stood before them, seemingly questioning them about something. "When did you find the deceased? Who was the one who found him?" A supervisor from the Ministry of Justice asked as he held a record book in his hand. "It was me, an hour ago." One of the envoys from the Qi Kingdom looked gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, after leaving the palace, Lord Han was in a bad mood because he had lost the competition. He shut himself in his room and did not come out even when it was time to eat. When I went to his room to call for him, there was no response for a long time. So I had the men from the office of the Chamberlain of Dependencies break open the door and found that Lord Han had been murdered. After he said this, he could no longer keep his calm. He said fiercely, "I don't care who killed Lord Han. 3 days. Within 3 days, the Jing Kingdom must hand over the murderer. Otherwise, we will immediately return to our country. The Qi Kingdom will wash away Lord Han's injustice with blood sooner or later." The Chancellor's expression changed slightly. An envoy from a country had been assassinated in the office of the Chamberlain of Dependencies. This was an extremely serious matter. If the envoy from the Jing Kingdom had died in the Qi Kingdom, not only His Majesty and the officials, but also the people of the Jing Kingdom would not let the matter rest. This time, they were really in trouble. Lord Gu and Lord Han were close friends. "I was a little agitated just now. Please forgive me." The envoy in blue from the Qi Kingdom looked sorrowful. After saying this, his tone changed as he looked at the Chancellor of the Supreme Court and said, "However, the Jing Kingdom must give us an explanation for this matter. Otherwise, this explanation will have to be demanded by us personally. Not even your third prince has the right to say such words." A sinister voice rang out from behind the crowd. Chang De strode out from the door and asked, "Where is the woman who participated in the competition in the palace?" The blue-robed envoy's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. "The envoy of our Qi Kingdom has died in your Jing Kingdom. Why don't we have the right to speak up?" At this moment, Lord Gu took a step forward and asked angrily, "I'll ask you one last time. Where is the woman who participated in the competition in the Imperial Palace?" Chang De glanced at him indifferently and his tone became cold. Ambassador Gu shuddered and stared at Chang De, unable to utter a single word. The rest of the envoys all looked at the leader in blue. He was the one who had been in contact with the two of them. Speaking of which, it was strange. Why weren't they here when such a big thing had happened? "Let's go." The envoy in blue said calmly, "They are but the young talents of our Qi Kingdom. They are acting on the orders of the third prince and are not part of the envoy. Naturally, they could not stay in the office of the Chamberlain of Dependencies for long. They left after returning from the palace." "Left?" Chang De's expression darkened. It was not convenient for him to question the envoy in the palace. When he chased after the envoy, he encountered the death of the envoy of the Qi Kingdom. He had no choice but to return and report this to His Majesty. He did not expect that after a short delay, the unidentified Grandmaster had already left. "Greetings, Seneschal Chang." A voice came from the side. Chang De turned his head and looked at the skinny young man who had just walked past. He nodded slightly. Even the Chancellor of the Supreme Court had not received such treatment. "Did you discover anything?" he asked the skinny young man. The young man smiled and said, "Let me ask them a few questions first." He walked up to the envoys of the Qi Kingdom and asked, "Where were all of you from the moment you returned to the office of the Chamberlain of Dependencies to the moment you discovered Lord Han's death?" "After returning here, of course, we all returned to our rooms," one of the envoys immediately replied. "Everyone was in their rooms?" the young man asked again. "Everyone," the envoy replied after some thought. They had lost both the written and military examinations. The third prince's many days of planning had been destroyed in a single day. If they did not return to their rooms to reflect on themselves, were they supposed to celebrate like the emperor and ministers of the Jing kingdom? The young man looked at the blue-robed envoy in charge and asked, "Are you sure?" The blue-robed envoy felt that the young man's eyes were so sharp that they seemed to be able to see through one's heart. He could not help feeling a little diffident, but he still nodded and said, gritting his teeth, "I'm sure." The young man nodded and waved his hand, saying, "Take all the envoys of the Qi kingdom away and temporarily detain them in the Supreme Court." The Chancellor of the Supreme Court and the Minister of Justice were stunned. What had happened just now? Why had all the envoys of the Qi kingdom been detained? Weren't the ones who died from the Qi kingdom? The officials of the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court were puzzled. When the envoy of the Qi kingdom came to his senses, he was left with nothing but anger. Why? What are you trying to do? Do you really want to completely fall out with the Qi kingdom? The envoys of the other countries are watching from outside. Do you really think you can shut everyone's mouths? I know. Lord Han's death must have been your doing. Is it finally our turn now? The skinny young man ignored the envoys of the Qi kingdom and said calmly, "Lord Han did not die in his room. His body was moved in later. The murderer did leave through the window, but the sequence was wrong. He did not come in from outside. After killing Lord Han, he closed the door and left through the window." The young man looked at the crowd and said slowly, "He killed Lord Han somewhere else, then moved Lord Han's body into the room through the window through the back corridor, and then came out from the room. After passing through the back corridor between the two rooms, he would pass through the garden. This is why there is soil under the window and why the footprints in the garden are deeper than the surroundings. If all of you are in your own rooms, then it is obvious that one of you is the murderer who killed Lord Han. I will explain the specific details to all of you when we arrive at the Supreme Court." He waved his hand and said, "Take them all away." When the young man finished speaking, the expression of the envoy in blue finally changed slightly. The young man glanced at him and strode outside. Watching the men of the intelligence office take away all the envoys of the Qi kingdom, the Chancellor of the Supreme Court looked at the Minister of Justice speechlessly. "Don't look at me, I don't know anything." The Minister of Justice shook his head and said, "It's no wonder His Majesty would promote him so much. I've been handling cases all my life and I've never seen such a genius. This person was born to solve cases." When the envoys waiting outside the office of the Grand Herald saw the investigators from the Jing kingdom coming out so quickly, they hurriedly made way for them. When they saw all the envoys of the Qi kingdom being taken away, the expressions on their faces became somewhat indescribable. Was it not enough to kill one? Were they planning to kill all the envoys of the Qi kingdom in one fell swoop? How were they going to shut everyone's mouths after today? How were they going to face the accusations of other countries? Killing envoys, was the Jing kingdom not afraid of becoming the target of public criticism? Even the most powerful Qi kingdom would not dare to do such a thing, would it? Even if they were to kill all the envoys of the Qi kingdom, there was still them. The Jing kingdom's actions this time had really left everyone dumbfounded. They had risked universal condemnation. They had to report this matter to their own countries and expose the evil deeds of the Jing kingdom to the world. If they wanted to deceive the world, they would have to kill everyone who knew about this. But was that even possible? As the envoys were thinking about this, they suddenly felt that something was not quite right. Chapter 497. An envoy of the Qi kingdom had died. Could it be the work of a patriotic warrior? When Li Yi and Rui walked out of the palace, they were still thinking about this matter. In order to occupy a place on the chivalry ranking list and the chivalry ranking list, those honest people in the martial arts world would do anything. They would do whatever could best embody their chivalry. Helping the elderly to walk and rescuing stray dogs were all child's play. If they wanted to do something, they would do something big. Therefore, the grandson of Prime Minister Qin, the first foppish playboy in the capital city, young Duke Qin, was still lying in bed. Killing an envoy of the state of Qi could be considered as getting rid of a scourge for the country. The wanted posters would definitely be posted all over the world. In terms of fame, it was much more worthwhile than beating up the young Duke Qin. When they walked to the palace gate, they met Changde. Besides him, there was another person who surprised Li Yi. "Lui Zhang pays his respects to you, Your Excellency." Looking at the young man who bowed to him, Li Yi asked in surprise, "Why are you here?" Li Yi actually admired this former subordinate very much. Back when he was in Qing and Prefecture, he had taught him many things about interrogation and investigation, such as record of redress of injustice, judge of the Great Song Dynasty, young Justice Bao, and the strange case of Shigong. He had taught him many classic cases. It was a pity that the person this guy admired the most was Detective Conan. Fortunately, people like Song Xiai, Bao Zheng, and Di Renjie did not exist in this world. Otherwise, they might join hands to strangle this guy who worshipped foreign things. Of course, the purpose of all this was so that he could be lazy, to cultivate talents for the country. A few days ago, he learned that he had been transferred to the Ministry of Justice and solved several major cases. He was doing very well there. It had only been a few days. How did he get involved with Chang again? "Your Excellency, His Majesty summoned me," Lui Zhang said quickly. "I am not Your Excellency now." Li Yi smiled and patted his shoulder, saying, "Do a good job. His Majesty will not mistreat you." Although Li Yi behaved casually, Lui Zhang did not relax. He said seriously, "Your Excellency's teachings, I will always remember them." All right, go quickly. Don't let His Majesty wait too long." Li Yi waved his hand and gestured to Changde. Then, he walked out of the palace gate with Rui. In the blink of an eye, it was the double 7th festival of the year. The guards in the residence had been building a high platform in the courtyard since yesterday. Today, he promised Xiao Huan that he would draw a poem on her sky lamp, so he had to go back early. The appointment with the old emperor was set after Chinese Valentine's Day. On the second day after Chinese Valentine's Day, Li Yi would be able to fetch Yong Ning from the palace. Everything in the residence had been prepared. Changde looked at Li Yi's departing figure with a profound gaze. Then, he looked at Lu Yi beside him. A trace of emotion appeared on his aged face. What kind of ability did this ordinary-looking young man in front of him have? Even he would not underestimate him. When he thought of what happened in the Supreme Court, he still found it hard to believe. He didn't use any punishment. He only asked the Qi Kingdom's envoy some irrelevant questions, and he was able to unravel the whole matter bit by bit. If Changde didn't already know about his abilities, he might even suspect that he was the one who killed the Qi Kingdom's envoy. However, such a talent that even His Majesty valued greatly was so respectful towards Li Yi. This was definitely not just because the two of them were once superior and subordinate. Changde was no longer surprised by the miracle that happened to Li Yi. When he brought Lui Zhang to the Hall of Diligent Government, he suddenly asked, "Was Lord Han really killed by that envoy?" Although the envoy in charge had just confessed to his crimes, Changde did not think that the personal enmity between the two was enough to make him kill someone out of anger. Lui Zhang shook his head and said, "No." He only admitted it because the real murderer was more important to him than his own life. In other words, it was terrifying. "Didn't you often say that there is only one truth?" Changde looked at him and asked. "That is not what I said." Lui Zhang shook his head and said, "Lord Han once said this. Of course, this is true. However, sometimes, what we want is not the truth, is it not?" "You are very good." After a while, Changde's face showed a look of admiration and he nodded. Talents were hard to come by. People who knew how to adapt to circumstances and reason were even rarer. Changde seemed to understand why His Majesty had entrusted that matter to him. Some scenes appeared in Lui Zhang's mind and he said, "It is all because Lord Li taught me well." 15 minutes. In the Hall of Diligent Government, Emperor Jing looked at the Chancellor and the Minister of Justice and confirmed again. "Yes, Your Majesty." "He only used 15 minutes, the Chancellor of the Supreme Court said helplessly. At this moment, he felt as if there were 10,000 horses galloping in his heart. Lui Zhang's brain must be different from ordinary people. Just now in the Supreme Court, he listened to him interrogating the envoy of the Qi kingdom. As a dignified chancellor of the Supreme Court, his inner shirt was soaked with sweat. The person who killed the envoy of the Qi kingdom was actually another envoy? If this case was handed over to the Supreme Court, it would probably never be solved. Let the people of the Qi kingdom handle this matter themselves. Emperor Jing waved his hand. Since it was an internal conflict between the envoy of the Qi kingdom, it had nothing to do with the Jing kingdom. He cared more about not carrying the bad reputation of assassinating the envoy of another kingdom. After a while, Emperor Jing looked at the people in the hall and said, "You can leave first. Lu Yizhong stays." The Chancellor of the Supreme Court and the Minister of Justice walked out of the Hall of Diligent Government. Changde gave the eunuchs in the hall a look, and they hurriedly left. This Lu Yizhong will have a meteoric rise in the future. The Chancellor of the Supreme Court walked down the steps in front of the hall and said with a sigh, "His future is limitless." The Minister of Justice nodded. His Majesty had always valued talents. Judging from his recent actions, this former subordinate of his had obviously caught His Majesty's eye. In the Hall of Diligent Government, only Emperor Jing, Changde, and Lu Yizhong were left. Even though there had been many occasions like this, Lu Yizhong could not help but feel nervous in front of the only supreme existence in the country. That matter. How is the investigation going? Emperor Jing walked down from above and asked in a low voice. Lu Yizhong lowered his head and stood with his hands by his side. He said, "Your Majesty, I have read all the old files of the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court. At present, there are only some minor clues. It is already very good to have some clues." Emperor Jing sighed and said, "After all, it has been 20 years. He glanced at Lu Yizhong and saw that he seemed to have something to say. He asked, "Did you find anything else?" Lu Yizhong thought for a moment and said, "Your Majesty, I found that after I began to investigate this matter, some of the evidence I needed was deliberately erased." Lu Yizhong raised his head and said, "In other words, they have already noticed." Emperor Jing's eyes were cold and he said coldly, "After so many years, are they still so vigilant? Can you find out who did it?" Changde asked. Lu Yizhong shook his head and said, "They did it very carefully and seemed to deliberately lead me. I was almost deceived and almost went astray." Changde frowned and said, "It has been more than 20 years. This case is already difficult." "If that is the case, then it is impossible." "Actually, not so," Lu Yizhong suddenly said. Emperor Jing and Changde looked at him at the same time. Speaking of this, a mysterious smile appeared on Lu Yizhong's face. He said, "His Excellency once said that the more you do, the more mistakes you make. In fact, the case has already entered a bottleneck, and now there is a new discovery. The more you do, the more mistakes you make." Emperor Jing's eyes flashed slightly. After nodding his head, he suddenly asked, "Which Excellency said this?" Seeing a trace of fanaticism on Lu Yizhong's face, which was the same as when he was at the palace gate, Changde's mouth twitched. He said, "Your Majesty, he should be talking about Master Li Yi." Chapter 498. On the 7th day of the 7th month, after the third prince of the Qi kingdom left the capital city, the rest of the envoys of the Qi kingdom who stayed in the Jing kingdom soon set foot on their way back. The invisible confrontation between the two countries still ended in the crushing defeat of the Qi kingdom. The Qi kingdom lost the war, lost both the civil and military examinations, and even lost one of their envoys to the internal strife. It could be said that the envoys of the Jing kingdom had lost all their face this time. They were too ashamed to stay in the capital city and left the capital city in a hurry the next morning. When their carriages and horses left the city, although the streets in Jingdo were not empty, the crowds of onlookers still blocked the streets in front of the city gates until not even a drop of water could trickle through. For most people in the Jing kingdom, since they were born, the Jing kingdom seemed to have been suppressed by the Qi kingdom in all aspects. As time went by, they had become accustomed to it. However, all this changed in the second year of Jing He. From the beginning of the year until now, there had been many incidents related to the Qi kingdom. When they thought about it carefully, the people of the Jing kingdom were surprised to find that the Qi kingdom did not seem to be so terrible, whether it was on the battlefield or in other places, the people of the Qi kingdom would lose and be defeated. It was not as difficult to defeat as they had imagined. Under the dazzling light of the current emperor, the Jing kingdom seemed to have become unprecedentedly powerful. There was County Earl Li in the literary field, Crown Prince Li Xian in the military field, and Her Highness the eldest princess. Though the three of them were still very young, they had shone brilliantly in this event and entered the eyes of the people of the capital city. The legendary stories of the three were spreading everywhere in the streets and alleys, in the brothels and tiled houses. County Earl Li was overflowing with talent, His Highness the eldest princess commanded the army like a god, and Her Highness the eldest princess was matchless in martial arts. Of course, this did not rule out the intentional guidance of the imperial court. Winning or losing was naturally important. But more importantly, they wanted to let the people of the capital city and even the whole Jing kingdom know that they had won. They had won beautifully. They wanted to let them know that His Majesty was wise and great. Under the leadership of the wise and mighty emperor and the outstanding courtiers, the country was becoming better and better. The national strength was flourishing, talents were emerging, and the country had reached a new level. The talented Li Xianbo didn't know that he was already very popular in the capital. He was standing in the courtyard, watching over 10 eunuchs carrying boxes of things from outside. The little princess wanted to come out of the palace to treat her illness. This was a huge matter. Everything she ate and used had to be regulated. How could she just do as she pleased? Although the little princess would only arrive tomorrow, early this morning, the people in the palace were already busy at the entrance of the count's mansion. All kinds of things were moved in and out, going to and fro the small courtyard he had vacated for Yongning. It was annoying to see. County Uncle Li, this is a gift from Princess Royal. When the two eunuchs brought in another large box, they did not move it to the small courtyard. Instead, they walked in front of Li Yi and said, "Why would Li Mingzhu give a gift for no reason?" Li Yi opened the box and was shocked by the treasures inside. She was unaccountably solicitous, and he was not used to it for a while. Her Royal Highness had suddenly become so generous. Did Her Royal Highness say anything else? Li Yi looked at the two and asked. No. The two shook their heads. Then move it in first. Li Yi waved his hand. There was no reason not to accept a gift that was delivered to his door. He would ask her what kind of gift it was next time they met. Right, there was also the matter of Tai Chi he didn't have time to ask her yesterday. There would be no problem with Uncle Li at home. Qixi was a festival for women. Mississippi Lu was rarely not busy today. She went to the temple with Rui and Xiao Huan, and there were a series of activities when she came back. It had nothing to do with him. He planned to see how Xing Zumo's bra was doing. Walking out of the gate, he saw a figure wandering under a few willow trees opposite the gate. He walked over and asked, "Why are you here?" Hearing Li Yi's voice, Li Yi hurriedly stopped and opened his mouth, but he didn't say anything. The expression on his face was a little awkward. What's wrong? Another difficult case? Li Yi looked at him and asked. Lu Yi was no stranger to this state. When he was in Qing and prefecture, he had this expression every time he encountered a difficult case and came to him. Seeing the embarrassed expression on his face again, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't rush. Investigate the most suspicious people one by one. You can't rush things like investigating a case. If you really can't figure it out, go out for a walk, listen to a play, and relax. Maybe there will be unexpected gains." Speaking of investigating a case, in addition to ability, this kind of thing also depended on luck and inspiration. Those basic things had been taught to him. Now, Li Yi couldn't help him too much with these things. Louis Chang was taken aback for a moment before he asked, "Didn't my lord say that the murderer often hides very deeply? We need to dig deeper clues and not be fooled by appearances. The most suspicious person is often not the murderer, did I say that?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. "Yes." Lu Yi nodded seriously. "Really?" "Really, nonsense." Li Yi glanced at him and said, "In the future, don't go to the brothel to listen to stories and plays. Those are deliberately made up to attract customers. How can there be such melodrama in reality? Investigate the case honestly and trust your intuition. Whoever you think is the most suspicious, then it's most likely the case. Li Yi was stunned and said, but didn't Master just say that investigating a case can't be rushed? If you really can't figure it out, you can go out for a walk, listen to a play. Did I say that? Li Yi narrowed his eyes and looked at him. Just now. Lu Yi opened his mouth and looked up at Li Yi. After a moment, he smiled bitterly and said, no, that's right. Li Yi nodded in satisfaction and patted his shoulder. He said, the truth can't be hidden. You have to believe in yourself. I still have things to do, so I won't keep you any longer. I'm leaving. Lu Yi smiled bitterly as he watched Li Yi get on the carriage. When he turned his head again, there was a thoughtful expression on his face. Not long after, this trace of thinking turned into understanding. Thank you, Master, for your guidance. He bowed towards the direction of the residence and turned to get on another carriage. A gray-clothed man lightly waved his whip and the carriage quickly disappeared. When Li Yi walked into the small courtyard, Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu were climbing up and down a temporary colored building. They tied colorful ribbons to the wood and chattered about something. Where's your young miss? Li Yi stood under the colored building and asked. Older sister Ruoqing has gone out. My young miss is painting in her room. Xiao Chui looked down and said, we haven't finished our work yet. Li, you go find her yourself. Halfway through her sentence, she seemed to have thought of something and immediately closed her mouth. She hurriedly ran down the building and said, wait, I'll go tell the young miss. There were no accidents this time. When Li Yi walked into the room, Xing Zumo was fully dressed and painting on the sky prayer lantern. Seeing Li Yi walk in, she didn't even look up and said, what is it? Speak. About the bra, have you thought about it? Li Yi didn't mind her attitude and walked over. Pa. Perverted. Zheng Zumo blushed and glanced at Xiao Chui. Seeing that she was still confused, she said, wait a moment, I'll finish painting these sky prayer lanterns first. There's still a long time before nightfall, what's the rush? Li Yi planned to go to the brothel later and said, there's still time to paint later. Xiao Chui, who was standing behind him, pouted and said, the cowherd and the weaver maid can only meet once a year, and it's finally the double seventh festival. Young Master Li, please wait a little longer. Miss will finish her painting very soon. The sky prayer lantern is very important, and if it's delayed, the weaver maid will not bless her. She originally wanted to say that if she delayed, the weaver maiden wouldn't bless her to find Lang Junrui. Halfway through her words, she realized that it wasn't appropriate to say these things to Li Yi. She immediately shut her mouth and blushed. What do you mean by once a year? Li Yi shook his head and looked at her. A day in heaven is a year on earth. July is a whole month, but it's only a little while in heaven. The weaver maiden sees the cowherd every day. Maybe she's already tired of seeing him. Why would she be in the mood to bless you? A day in heaven is a year on earth. After hearing Li Yi's words, Xiao Chui's expression froze. The old people in the brothel often said this. She blinked her eyes and thought about it. She realized that what Li said seemed to be very reasonable. She suddenly felt discouraged. She didn't look forward to the Chinese Valentine's Day that she had been looking forward to for so long. Chapter 499. Seeing Xiao Chui leave with a depressed expression, it wouldn't be long before Xiao Zhu found out that the weaver girl had lunch with the cowherd every day and that it wasn't just once a year. Zheng Zumo looked up at Li Yi and said, Xiao Chui, you lied to her too. She's been talking about Chinese Valentine's Day since last month. The outside world is cruel. Little girls like Xiao Chui have been living in a greenhouse and are easily deceived by these beautiful things. There's no harm in letting them feel the cruelty of reality in advance. Li Yi glanced at her and said, this is what a prostitute like you should do. I'm just helping you. You don't have to thank me. There are a few pretty good newcomers in the brothel. You can try your best to promote them. I want to try that new bra. Zheng Zumo glanced at him and put down the brush in her hand. No problem. Li Yi was waiting for her to say this and said, if you need money or manpower, just let me know. If Miss Ruoqing can't solve it, she can come to me. Rui Workshop, Perfume Workshop, Ice Making Workshop, and a series of shops under the brothel's name actually had a very large daily income. However, the brothel needed to operate, expand, and have enough money for Mississippi Lu to create the hero ranking. Including the hero conference that would be held in 2 months, they needed a lot of money. At present, they needed to occupy more markets and establish the first high-end lingerie brand in Jing Kingdom. It was necessary to make a lot of money before others discovered the business opportunities in this area. Also, Zheng Zumo's face was slightly red. She said hesitantly, I've designed a few new styles these days. Take a look. Then hurry up and take them out. Li Yi looked at her. He was in a hurry. Zheng Zumo glared at him and took out a few drawings from a small box. She placed them on the table and sat on the edge of the bed, no longer looking at them. Li Yi flipped through it a few times and frowned. Although Zheng Zumo's drawing skills were excellent, the design of these bras was a bit conservative. Seeing him frown, a look of disappointment appeared on Zheng Zumo's face. For these things, she had only slept for 2 hours last night, but she was still rejected, so she was naturally disappointed. I'll draw a few for you to see. Li Yi picked up the pen and quickly flipped through the thick bra illustrated handbook in his mind. He opened the copy in paste mode. Okay, take a look at these. Time was limited, so Li Yi only drew a few pieces. He walked over and handed the paper to her. Zheng Zumo took it and stared at it for a moment. Her face immediately turned from red to red. She crumpled the papers into a ball and said angrily, shameless. Li Yi shook his head. When he walked out of Zheng Zumo's room, he was still a little indignant. How could it be shameless? Future experience tells us that the less fabric used in underwear, the more valuable it is. Although this woman was beautiful, she didn't have the slightest advanced business sense. Li Yi had some doubts. Was it a wrong decision to give this business to her? Obscene, shameless. In the room, Zheng Zumo's face was red. She sat on the bed in a daze and cursed a few times. She spread out the paper that she had crumpled. Thinking about how she would wear the bra drawn on the paper, she couldn't help but blush even more. Oldman's son was born to work in the brothel. The poor performers in the capital now almost regarded him as a god. Perhaps even the current emperor didn't have a high position in the hearts of the performers. There were many brothels in the capital, and many of them existed in the form of small groups. However, in just a few months, Oldman's son had made the brothel the largest in the capital and even in the whole Jing Kingdom. His achievements were amazing. Although the scale was huge, the order was the best among all the brothels. Tickets were bought in a civilized manner, and people entered the brothel in a civilized manner. If anyone wanted to cause trouble, a few beast-like giants would immediately drag them to a corner and teach them the rules. Li Yi walked around a brothel in the city and was very satisfied with the current situation. The plays in the brothel were somewhat similar to those in the cinema. There would be a large-scale update every month, and all kinds of novel stories and scripts emerged one after another. No one knew how many people had become regular customers. Mr. Li? When Li Yi was about to go backstage to have a look, he suddenly heard a surprised voice from behind. He turned his head, looked at the strange young man opposite him, and asked in confusion, "Forgive me for not recognizing you. You are?" The young man hurriedly said, "I'm Wansu, just a small censor." "It's not strange that you don't know me, Mr. Li." That day, Mr. Li won 2 rounds of the written exam in the Golden Hall, and I was watching from the hall. Wansu? Li Yi felt that he had heard this name before. After thinking for a while, his face revealed a surprised expression. He looked at him and asked, "The censor who impeached the king of Shu?" A trace of embarrassment appeared on the young censor's face, and he nodded slightly. "Not bad, not bad." Li Yi immediately admired this young censor called Wansu. He looked around and said, "However, as a censor, what are you doing here instead of doing what you should be doing?" Wan Su hurriedly said, I'm here on the orders of Deputy Prime Minister Ma. Li Yi looked at him and frowned. He asked, the censor is also in charge of the brothel? Wan Su was startled and shook his head. He said, Lord Li, you misunderstood. It was Deputy Prime Minister Ma who said that these brothels are the places where people can speak freely. Deputy Prime Minister Ma said that censors should not only keep their eyes on the court, but also the public opinion. Li Yi thought for a while. If the brothel became a place that censors often hung around, then as long as the news that the King of Shu and young Duke Qin had broken up the previous evening, Emperor Jing would find out that his son was gay during the morning court session the next day. The civil and military officials would also know that they had to stay away from these two people in the future. Wouldn't that be great? Lord Ma is very far-sighted. Li Yi said with great approval. The censor called Wan Su bowed slightly to him and said, I just happened to see Mr. Li, so I came to pay my respects. I still have work to do later, so I won't disturb Mr. Li. Li Yi waved his hand. He didn't have much time to chat with this censor, so he turned around and walked towards the back of the brothel. It wasn't until Li Yi's figure disappeared that the excitement on Wan Su's face gradually disappeared. In many people's eyes, Mr. Li had become a legend. He single-handedly turned the tide and saved the face of the country, causing the envoy of the Qi kingdom to return in defeat. Because of this, he had gained many fans in the capital city, including this censor called Wan Su. Of course, because of his special identity, he naturally knew some information that ordinary people didn't. In his heart, he admired this Mr. Li who was about the same age as him even more. Wan Su calmed down a little and then remembered that he still had important work to do today. It was the 7th chapter of Liang Shanbo and Zhuing Tai. He had to hurry and listen to the story. A brothel was not a place that a woman like his wife should come to. However, the latest hand-copied version would only be sold tomorrow morning. If he couldn't tell her the story when he returned at night, he was afraid that he would have to sleep in the study again. Wan Su suddenly felt a headache when he thought of how she would cry and ask him to continue the story. However, he still bought a ticket at the door and walked in unhappily. Chapter 500. Nowadays, there are more and more customers who like to come to the brothel to listen to the opera. The old place is a bit small. I plan to rent the surrounding land as well. This way, each place can be expanded by 50%. Otherwise, I'm afraid it won't be long before it can't accommodate so many customers. As they walked into the brothel again, Ruoqing pointed at the neatly arranged tents and said to Li Yi. Li Yi nodded and said, you can make the decision on these matters. If you want to rent more land, I'm afraid you'll have to go through the government. I'll let County Magistrate Lu know. As soon as he finished speaking, a strange sound came from beside him. Li Yi turned to look at her and asked, you haven't eaten? Wan Ruoqing blushed slightly and said, I ate a little this morning. Li Yi raised his head and looked at the sky. The sun was about to set. He frowned and said, no matter how busy you are, you can't skip meals. There are many things that you don't need to do by yourself. Just leave it to the people below. Let's go out and eat something. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, no need. The brothel is about to close today, let's go. I'm hungry too. Li Yi didn't wait for her to continue and walked out first. Wan Ruoqing was startled and could only follow him helplessly. The capital was not like Qing and prefecture. The curfew system was very strict. Except for a few days every year, people were not allowed to walk on the streets after 8 o'clock. If there was a violation, the punishment would be detention, and the punishment would be execution on the spot. Even if the offender died, there was no way to redress the grievances. Therefore, when the sky gradually darkened, the customers in the brothel all reluctantly left and waited to come back the next day. Recently, the new Liang Shanbo and Zhuing Tai came out. I don't know who wrote it. I almost cried just now. That's nothing. I'm 40 years old this year. Didn't I cry like a 4-year-old just now? If it wasn't for someone stopping me, I would have rushed up and beaten that Ma guy. Judging from the audience's reaction, Liang Shanbo and Zhuing Tai was another successful play after the legend of the White Snake. Thinking about it, Liang Shanbua and Zhu Yingtai was one of the 4 great love stories among the common people. It had been passed down for nearly 2,000 years, and it was still talked about enthusiastically by people. His maids hid in a corner and cried. Then he deducted a month's salary. It was only the beginning of the month, but the monthly allowance of the maidservants had already increased by 5 times. If this continued, it would be too wasteful. What's going on? Why has it always been Liang Shanbo, Zhu Yingtai, these past few days? Where did the white mistress go? Why hasn't Lady Qin come out? A dissatisfied voice came from behind, and one could hear the strong resentment in the voice. Li Yi turned around and saw a luxuriously dressed middle-aged man walking towards him. A man behind the middle-aged man immediately said, "Fifth Master, I just went to ask. They said that there was no white concubine during this period of time. If you want to see her, you have to book the whole place, but the price is too high." Price? Does Fifth Master care about that little bit of money? The middle-aged man walked past Li Yi and Wan Ruoqing and said, "You go and arrange it tomorrow. In short, I want to see the white mistress tomorrow. Fifth Master, don't worry. Leave it to me." The man hurriedly followed. When he passed by Li Yi, he paused, slightly tilted his head, and nodded. Then he strode forward again. "What's wrong?" Seeing Li Yi standing there, Wan Ruoqing asked in confusion. Li Yi looked away from the man and said with a smile, "Nothing. It seems that the legend of the white snake is quite popular. These days, there will be 2 more shows every day. After all, everyone has their own preferences. Some customers like those strange things." Wan Ruoqing nodded her head. To her, it was just a simple sentence. The places where the brothels were located were not in the prosperous areas of the capital. There were not many places to eat around. In addition, it was almost evening, and many shops were closed. It was not easy to find a bun shop that was about to close. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Do you want to eat 2 buns to fill your stomach?" Wan Ruoqing nodded. She had lived a poor life since she was young. For a long time, buns were considered a luxury. Seeing someone walk in, the waiter looked up and said, "There are only 4 buns left. 8 copper coins." 4 was 4. Fortunately, it was still warm. Li Yi did not bring any money with him. He was about to ask the guard not far away to come over when the waiter saw Wan Ruoqing standing outside. After a moment of shock, he waved his hand and said, "Forget it. There are only 4 left. You can take them all. It's free." Li Yi was stunned. He immediately realized that he had been crushed by Wan Ruoqing in terms of appearance. 8 copper coins is also money. You don't need anything. Does your boss know that you are so generous? Li Yi asked the guard to take out his money bag. He carefully counted a few coins and slammed them on the table beside him. He glared at the waiter and said coldly, "Do you think I need 8 copper coins?" The waiter stood there in a daze. He looked at the copper coins on the table and then at the strange customer who had disappeared. He muttered, 2 copper coins are missing. The buns were not big. Li Yi quickly finished one. Wan Ruoqing only took 2 small bites of the bun in her hand. Recalling the scene that had just happened in the bun shop, the corners of her mouth curled into a slight smile. After finishing the second bun, Li Yi turned his head and asked, "You should know about the martial arts circle conference, right?" Wan Ruoqing nodded and said, "I've already asked them to spread the news. The other prefectures have also sent fast horses to spread the news. The people going to Qing and prefecture are going by water. They will arrive tomorrow. They will only need a month to spread the news." Mississippi Lou's sighed and the brothel complimented each other. The chivalry ranking needed the help of the brothel to spread the news. They would also send people to help maintain the security of the brothel. The people in the martial arts circle were more active than them in the matter of the martial arts circle conference. The purpose of the brothel was to spread the news among the common people. The sky grew darker. Li Yi looked at her and said, "It's getting late. Leave the brothel to them. I'll take you home." Wan Ruoqing nodded and handed the last bun in her hand to him. She said, "There's still one bun left. I can't eat it. Do you want to eat it?" Seeing Li Yi shake his head, Wan Ruoqing looked around. She suddenly took a few quick steps to the side and placed the bun in a beggar's bowl in the corner. "Let's go." She walked over and said to Li Yi with a smile. At a certain moment, a figure in ragged clothes curled up in the corner of the wall suddenly trembled. He took a few deep breaths and saw the bun in the bowl in front of him. His breathing immediately became hurried. He immediately picked up the bun and took a big bite. To him, who hadn't eaten anything for 3 days, a bun that could save his life had an extraordinary meaning. He raised his head and only saw the side of the woman's face reflected in the sunset. His hand paused and the bun fell to the ground. Heavenly Empress. Li Yi and Wan Ruoqing's figures gradually faded away. A guard following behind them saw the beggar suddenly kneel on the ground and crazily kowtow in a certain direction. He muttered, "It's just a bun, is there a need to do this?" He shook his head and walked forward several steps. Then, he looked back and sighed. He slowly walked over and took out a piece of silver from his waist and placed it in the broken bowl in front of the beggar. After an unknown period of time, the beggar's forehead was dripping with blood. He finally stopped and picked up the dirty bun. He looked in the direction that the Heavenly Empress had left in, his face full of sincerity. After a long time, he looked away from the distance and inadvertently glanced at the broken bowl in front of him. The bun in his hand fell to the ground once more. "Thank you, Heavenly Empress. Thank you, Heavenly Empress. Thank you, Heavenly Empress." Around them, people walked out of their houses. They looked at the beggar in the corner and sighed as they shook their heads. "This beggar, I'm afraid he's gone crazy. I think he's already been lying there for 3 days. He's quite pitiful. Give him something to eat. If he really died here, it would be troublesome." Chapter 501. The servants of the Li residence were especially diligent today. They were woken up before dawn by the head housekeeper. Even the pillars outside were cleaned until they were spotlessly clean. There was going to be a guest coming to the residence, and it was a very important guest. A few days ago, they all found out about this matter. In order to welcome this guest, Lord Zhu not only made them specially clean up a courtyard, but also had extremely harsh requirements for them. Although they had been scolded a lot, their salaries had more than doubled. The harsher the scolding, the fiercer the increase. Now, in the residence, which servant girl had the most allowance, they just had to see who had been scolded the most by Lord Zhu. It was Chinese Valentine's Day yesterday, and Lord Zhu entered the palace early in the morning. The maids of the Li residence were naturally curious about who was coming to the residence. Li Yi had been in a good mood these days, especially when he was hugging little Yongning. He felt a sense of intimacy that came from his soul. It was something that no one in this world could give him. Today was the day he had arranged to meet the old emperor. He could have waited at home for Yongning to be sent over, but when he saw old man Chang's old face at the door, he knew that he would have to enter the palace again. The morning court session at the Hall of Political Affairs had not ended yet, so Changde took him directly to the Hall of Diligent Government. As soon as he stepped into the hall, he discovered that he wasn't the only one inside. Li Xian was there as well. There were also a few people who looked somewhat familiar. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that they were the Chancellor of the Directorate of Studies and several mathematics professors. County Uncle Li Xian did not greet him first, but the people from the directorate seemed to be very familiar with him, and they all smiled and cupped their hands in greeting. "Good morning, everyone." Li Yi casually cupped his hands in greeting and walked towards Li Xian. The Chancellor of the Directorate hurriedly chased after him and said, "I wonder when Lord Li will start his mathematics class again." The mathematics professors of the Directorate can attend and learn the new method of mathematics. The professors nodded. His Majesty had decreed that all students of the Imperial College had to learn the new mathematics. However, the problem was that the professors who were in charge of teaching them did not know much about it. These days, the mathematics professors of the Directorate of Imperial College had been anxious to the point of insanity. They were afraid that the Imperial Court would have something for them to calculate again. Once or twice could be forgiven, but if they made a few more mistakes and caused a loss of tens of thousands of taels of silver to the national treasury, it would be hard to say whether they could still keep their heads on their necks. I won't be free for the next few months. Let's talk about it after the new year. The chancellor of the directorate's face twitched, and several professors of mathematics looked horrified. After the new year, anything could happen in 5 months. They didn't know if they could see Uncle Lee at that time. They couldn't wait another day. What's the matter this time? Li Yi ignored the people from the directorate and walked over to ask. Li Xian shook his head and said, I don't know. I was also summoned to the palace early in the morning. Li Yi frowned. His intuition told him that trouble was coming. After waiting for a quarter of an hour in the hall of diligent government, the old emperor finally arrived. These days, his condition seemed to have stabilized, and his complexion looked good. In all fairness, Li Yi hoped that the old emperor could live a few more years, so that he could also live a few more years in peace. Today, I asked you to come here because I have an important matter. I have thought about it for a long time, and I still intend to entrust it to you. After sitting down, Emperor Jing said directly. When he spoke, he looked at Li Yi and Li Xian. A few days ago, because of the chessboard and rice, I and many officials almost fell into the trap of the envoy of the Qi kingdom. Before that, Prince Jean used the new mathematics method to save tens of thousands of taels of silver for the national treasury. A thoughtful expression appeared on Emperor Jing's face, and he said, Since then, I have discovered that mathematics is really unfathomable, and its importance is no less than that of governing the country and pacifying the people. Hearing this, the mathematics doctor of the directorate looked ashamed. His Majesty's words were like a slap in the face. Li Yi was a little surprised that the old emperor had such insight. Technology was the first productivity, and mathematics was the queen of science. After hundreds or thousands of years, people would understand this truth. Although the level of mathematics in this era was far from being able to understand this, if basic mathematics was used to the extreme, it would be enough to make a big step forward for the Jing kingdom. Therefore, I intend to set up a mathematics school outside of the directorate, and Li Yi, the county earl of Chang'an, will be the superintendent. In addition to the mathematics doctors and mathematics students of the directorate, another 100 people will be selected from the capital to learn the new mathematics method. The superintendent can make the decisions for the affairs of the mathematics school. Mathematics school? Li Yi was stunned when he heard this. No way. Was it going to be so big this time? In addition to the mathematics school, an academy of sciences will be set up independently of the Ministry of Works. Emperor Jing glanced at Li Xian and thought of the things he called science. He said, Superintendent Li Xian, regarding the 2 academies, I will let the Ministry of Works quickly supervise the construction. Li Xian's face showed a surprised expression. A few days ago, he had gathered all the things that the people had come up with, but he had not received any response. He thought that Uncle Huang had long forgotten about it. At this moment, he was a little surprised. The superintendent of the Academy of Sciences was much more interesting than the supervisor of Jiangxi province. Didn't it mean that in the future, he could work on those things justifiably? Although Emperor Jing's words were very good and very right, the establishment of the mathematics school and the Academy of Sciences was a magnificent feat in the Jing kingdom. If the mathematics school was incorporated into the Academy of Sciences, and the Academy of Agriculture, Army, Medicine, and Life Science were added to the Academy of Sciences, this great emperor would definitely be remembered in history. For an ancient person, it was very rare to be able to do this, but he really didn't want to be a superintendent. Wouldn't it be exhausting for a single person to teach so many students? He had to recruit more teachers. The Imperial College's mathematics professors were not bad. It was just that their rigid way of thinking had not been reversed. It wouldn't be a problem for them to give a few pointers. There was also Prince Jean. Although he was young, it was not a problem. This boy was born to do mathematics, so he couldn't let him go. If he didn't have a cheating device, he might be crushed by him. Masterly, this is the list of the students of the mathematics school. Changde handed a long memorial to Li Yi, and even the way he addressed him changed. The list was drawn up. It seemed that Emperor Jing had never thought about asking for his consent. Didn't he say that he would not force him? Didn't he say that the emperor would not go back on his words? The memorial was as long as his arm, and it was densely filled with names. After Li Yi glanced at it, he frowned slightly. Your Majesty, this list. I'm afraid it's not possible. Why not? Emperor Jing looked at him doubtfully. Most of these people were selected from the families of the powerful and officials. If he didn't insist on recruiting 30% of the students from poor families, he was afraid that these 100 places would be occupied by them. Anyone could see that the imperial court attached great importance to the mathematics school. This meant that it was almost a blessed place for promotion. Whether it was a noble or a courtier, who didn't want to place their own people there? I forgot to bring a small notebook. Li Yi touched his waist sleeve and said with some depression. What? The doubt on Emperor Jing's face was even stronger. Nothing. Li Yi raised his head and said with a serious face, Your Majesty, you may not know that mathematics is the same as writing poetry and playing chess. It is also about talent. Talented people can master extremely profound knowledge in a short period of time, just like Prince Jean. However, there are also some people who don't have talent in mathematics. No matter how hard they work, they won't achieve much in their lifetime. Emperor Jing nodded. Although he didn't know much about the new mathematics, what Li Yi said just now was true everywhere. Every path was about talent. Old General Shui couldn't write beautiful essays, and Prime Minister Qin couldn't lead troops to war. However, in fact, when they were young, there was no difference in the education they received. It was nothing more than a matter of talent. That makes sense. In your opinion, how should the students of the mathematics school be selected? Emperor Jing agreed with Li Yi's opinion and looked at him and asked. Li Yi smiled and said, This is simple. Chapter 502. Your Majesty, take a look. This Chen Lisan has the word "san" in his name. He must be lacking wood in the 5 elements. Generally speaking, people who lack wood in the 5 elements are not good at mathematics. Also, this Qin Feng, crazy Qin. Why does a lunatic want to learn mathematics? This name is inauspicious. He is not suitable to enter my mathematics college. Also, this Cui Shixin likes the new and hates the old. My mathematics college will naturally not accept such a person with bad conduct. And this Li Jianren, what kind of mess is this? What kind of place do you think our mathematical college is? Unexpectedly, he forgot to bring his notebook. Li Yi finally found it in the corner of the library and thought that he must put it in a conspicuous place next time. Li Xian was flabbergasted as he watched Li Yi pick out those people one by one. The Chancellor of the Directorate and several mathematics professors were dumbfounded. Was this how the Divination Academy recruited students? Those who lacked wood in the 5 elements would not be accepted. Those with inauspicious names, how was his name inauspicious? Qin Feng was crazy Qin. Cui Shixin liked the new and hated the old. Was Li Jianren equal to Bitch Li? His Majesty was here. Could this county uncle Li dare to be more careless? This was clearly revenge, naked revenge. Among the Chen family, Cui family, Qin family, and Assistant Minister Li's family of the Ministry of Works, which one of them was not inextricably linked to the King of Shu? Of course, they had more in common. Because of the fight in the imperial palace, these families were the most active in impeaching County Uncle Li in the court. At a certain moment, the Chancellor of the Directorate suddenly remembered that he seemed to be involved in this matter. Looking at County Uncle Li, who was still picking out people one by one, he could not help but feel a chill from the bottom of his spine. Emperor Jing's face was full of astonishment. He looked at Li Yi and said, Be serious. If he really used such an absurd reason to select students, the court would definitely be in an uproar. Thinking of the involvement of so many courtiers, even Emperor Jing himself felt a headache. When the Chancellor of the Directorate heard this, he was even more shocked. County Uncle Li was so frivolous about such an important matter, but the Emperor only said such a sentence. If it was any other courtier, their heads would be jumping on their necks. At this moment, he was even more certain that County Uncle Li could not be offended. Li Yi sighed and thought that this method would not work. He said, actually, if we want to see if they have talent in mathematics, we only need to conduct a test on them before they enter the academy. Whether they are from a poor family or a noble official, as long as they meet the age requirement of 20, they can all sign up. At that time, we only need to select the top 100 according to their results. Jing Di nodded his head. This method was to his liking. In recent years, he had deliberately supported the poor and weakened the aristocratic families. Li Yi's action did not differentiate between the poor and the noble, which was to his liking. That's right. I will have someone put up a notice outside. Those who meet the requirements can register. 10 days later, there will be an examination, and the best will be admitted. At that moment, Li Xian stepped forward and said, Uncle Huang, the Science Academy is different from the Mathematics Academy. You can't just recruit young people. Emperor Jing nodded and said, You are the Academy supervisor. You can decide these things yourself. Upon hearing this, Li Yi's eyes lit up, and he asked, Your Majesty, may I ask if the Academy's enrollment? Without waiting for him to finish, Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, You can decide everything except enrollment. If he were to decide the candidates, there would be a storm in the court. The Qin, Chen, and Cui families, and even half of the court would be disturbed by him. Li Yi thought that they were all surnamed Li, but the difference in treatment was too great. He could only nod and said, I will follow your orders. I will come up with the examination questions as soon as possible. Your Majesty, please send someone to the Li family to make a copy in a few days. In order to keep it confidential, let them go back to the palace after the examination. For the poor students, this was a rare opportunity. He was afraid that the number of applicants would reach a very terrifying level. After coming up with the questions, he still had to ask someone to make a copy. Of course, he could not complete such a heavy workload by himself. Then let's do as you say. Unexpectedly, he had even considered this. Emperor Jing nodded and looked at the people of the Imperial College. He said, The establishment of the Mathematics Academy has been completed. The Mathematics Department of the Imperial College will be temporarily merged into the Mathematics Academy. You and County Magistrate Li will discuss the specific matters after the merger. I will follow your orders. Several mathematics doctors immediately responded and breathed a long sigh of relief. This was good. In a short time, with County Magistrate Li at the top, there should be nothing wrong with his head. Not long after, several people walked out of the palace one after another. Emperor Jing slowly stood up and said, He really makes me worry. Things in the court are not as simple as he thinks. When he walked out of the palace, he murmured, It is not the time yet. The court cannot be in chaos. Changde's expression was a little complicated. Finally, he could not help but say, Your Majesty, do you really think he has given up? Emperor Jing looked back at him. Changde shook his head and said, Although I don't know what he will do, I am sure that this time, the Qin family, the Chen family, the Cui family, and the King of Shu will not have anyone enter the Mathematics Academy. As for County Magistrate Li, who was about to become their superior, several mathematics doctors naturally tried to flatter him after they left the palace. However, this young superior was not moved at all. They looked at each other and smiled bitterly. They were afraid that their days in the future would not be easy. However, the Imperial College had a deep foundation. As long as they learned the new mathematics well, they could ask the ministers in the court to advise them and return to the Imperial College. The mathematics doctors naturally did not believe that Prince Jean, who was only 10 years old, was better than all of them. It was just that they had not been exposed to the new mathematics. What talent! It must be that County Magistrate Li deliberately flattered His Majesty. Sister Shaoning, I will miss you. In a luxurious carriage, Yongning opened the curtain and waved to Princess Shaoning. She said in a soft voice. Although they could not see from the carriage, they could guess that the arrogant Lolita's face must be ugly now. It was better not to provoke her. It did not take long for the carriage to start slowly. There were 4 old men in gray following them. There was also one in the corner of the carriage. He closed his eyes and kept a straight face, looking very skilled. In order to not let the entire capital know that the little princess had left the palace, the old emperor only sent these 5 people to protect her. Presumably, their martial arts skills were not bad. Of course, the serving maids and the dozens of palace guards were already waiting for her at home. The carriage started slowly. The arrogant Lolita stood there with a face full of dissatisfaction. Li Emingzu touched her head and said, "If you want to leave the palace, we will go find them tomorrow." "Humph, I don't care." Princess Shaoning curled her lips and shook her head. She glared at the carriage that had already gone far away and walked forward angrily. After a while, she walked back again. She lowered her head and kicked the ground with her feet. She asked, "What time tomorrow?" When their Lord Ju walked in from outside with a 5 or 6-year-old girl in his arms, the servants of the Li family finally knew what kind of guest they had prepared for these days. Other than looking a little cute, there was nothing special about this girl. Why did Lord Ju treat her so well? Could it be, after the servants of the Li family bowed and greeted him, they began to make wild guesses? Li Yi had already walked into the inner courtyard with Yong Ning in his arms. "Young master, whose family is this girl? She is so beautiful." Fang walked over and asked curiously. An old man in gray followed behind Li Yi and was about to step in when Fang suddenly reached out and said, "You can't go in here." The old man frowned but did not say anything. He reached out and pressed his hand on the shoulder of the man blocking the way. He found that the man did not move at all. "Aya, do you still want to fight?" Fang rolled up his sleeves. He had learned a few moves from second great uncle a few days ago. This old man seemed to be quite strong. It was a good time to spar with him. A strange look flashed in the old man's eyes. He pushed forward lightly. Fang staggered back a few steps and fell on his butt. The old man glanced at the courtyard again. He stood at the entrance like a wooden pillar and did not walk in. "Rui, you must remember what grandmother told you last time." As the old mistress spoke, she pulled Rui's hand and walked out from inside. When she saw Li Yi in the courtyard, she was stunned for a moment. She quickly walked over with a hint of joy on her old face. She gently pinched Yong Ning's little face and asked Li Yi, "Whose family is this girl? She is so beautiful." Li Yi touched his nose and said, "Her Majesty's family." Chapter 503. From His Majesty's family? The old madam was stunned and didn't immediately understand what Li Yi meant. "This is Princess Yong Ning," Li Yi explained again. "Princess Yong Ning." The old madam's expression froze. The next moment, she quickly withdrew her hand from the little girl's face, her face full of shock. Seeing the old madam's body sway, Rui hurried over to support her. When she finally regained her composure, the old madam broke free from Rui's support and hurriedly bowed. "This old madam greets your highness." Princes and princesses were born with a higher status. Although the old madam was an honorary title, she still had to bow to the royal family. In the past year, Yong Ning was used to the princesses' maids and eunuchs bowing to her. However, this old madam was clearly related to her brother. She didn't know what to do and looked at Li Yi with pleading eyes. Li Yi said helplessly, "Old madam, don't be nervous. Princess Yong Ning left the palace secretly this time and can't be made public." "How can we do that? Her highness is of noble birth and has come to our residence. How can we treat her lightly?" The old madam's sense of hierarchy was deeply ingrained in her. She looked at Li Yi and said, "Aren't you going to invite her highness in?" It took a lot of effort to make the old madam understand that her highness was here for a vacation and couldn't let too many people know. Otherwise, His Majesty would blame them. It was better to keep a low profile. Even so, the old madam still took this matter seriously. She gathered all the maids and servants in the residence and lectured them. The gist of it was that the little girl was very noble and had the same status as a duke. If any servant dared to show any disrespect to her, they should pack their things and return home. In this day and age, it was easy to find a servant's job, but to find a place like the Li residence, where the money on the surface was just for show, and as long as one performed well, one could become rich in a few months, was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. No servant girl would do such an unwise thing. After sending the old madam off with much difficulty, he repeatedly reminded Li Yi to be careful before he left. If something were to happen to the little princess in the residence, His Majesty would be furious. Then, from the master to the servant girls, no one would be able to escape. Li Yi repeatedly promised. Even if the old madam didn't say anything, how could he let anything happen to Yongning? After all, in this world, she was the only one who could comfort him in some ways. Xiaohuan walked in from the outside with 2 candied haws in her hands. When she saw the little unfamiliar figure in the courtyard, she immediately said, "Son-in-law, whose child is this? He's so cute." She walked over and pinched the little girl's face. She handed over a stick of candied hawthorn and said, "Little sister, what's your name?" "Big sister will treat you to candied hawthorn." The summer stick of candied fruit had to be eaten as soon as possible after being taken out of the wooden box filled with ice cubes. Otherwise, the sugar would melt and it would be very sticky and uncomfortable to hold. Princess Yongning sat in the shade of the courtyard, eating candied fruits that she hadn't eaten for a long time. Although the candied fruit had melted due to the hot weather and the taste wasn't as good as she remembered, she still ate it with relish. After all, no matter how bad it tasted, it was still candied fruit. Xiaohuan hid in the room with a pale face and didn't dare to come out. Thinking that she had just pinched the princess's face, tears welled up in her big eyes. That was the princess, the emperor's daughter. If the emperor knew, would he arrest her and punish her? It was said that disrespecting the princess would result in being beheaded. Xiaohuan didn't want to be beheaded, but it was the emperor. Would the young master and miss save her? Li Yi shook his head helplessly. He dragged her out of the quilt and said, "What's wrong? You can't pinch the princess's face. Don't worry, no one will punish you. Hurry up and come out. It's such a hot day. Isn't it hot under the quilt?" "Really?" The little maid poked her head out of the quilt and asked with tears in her eyes. "Has the young master ever lied to you?" Li Yi looked at her and asked seriously. The little maid sniffled and said in a low voice, "Yes, many times." He dragged the little maid out of the room and said, "If you want to pinch it, you can pinch it a few more times. Tomorrow, there will be 2 more princesses coming. You can." "No, you can only pinch the little one." Although she didn't have to worry about being arrested and punished, Xiaohuan was still a little afraid of the legendary princess. She hid in the distance and didn't dare to approach. Seeing this, Li Yi didn't force her. Anyway, she was going to stay here for 2 months. She would get used to it after 2 days. Outside the courtyard, Fang patted the dust off his butt and crossed his arms. He looked at the old man in gray standing at the door with a suspicious gaze. Sometimes, he smacked his lips and his face showed a look of amazement. Of course, he was not only amazed at the old man's great strength, but also surprised that he could stand there for an hour without moving. If he didn't observe carefully and could still feel the old man's breath, he would definitely think that he was a dead man. "Go away." Just as old Fang's face was about to reach the old man suddenly opened his eyes and said coldly, "Old Fang, don't worry." Old Fang jumped to the side and glared at the old man. Then he curled his lips, dusted off his butt, and walked away. "Humph, what's so great about being able to fight?" In 30 years, he could break the old man's bones with one hand. If the old man was still alive in 30 years, then 40 years, 50 years, "I can't outlast second granduncle, but I can't outlast you." The old man indifferently glanced at the man who possessed a monstrous strength and shook his head. He turned his head to look at the courtyard beside him and heard the clear laughter of the little princess coming from inside. He turned his head and once again closed his eyes. The order they received was to deal with some emergencies. His Majesty specifically said that they shouldn't interfere with anything about County Uncle Li except for that. In the clean courtyard, there was a swing hanging from a huge tree that could cover half of the courtyard. At this time, the sun was about to set. Li Yi pushed Yongning, who was sitting on the swing. He had become more and more accustomed to her smile, and his heart was inexplicably relaxed. "What did the old madam say to you just now?" Li Yi turned his head and asked her. "No, nothing." Rui blushed slightly and said immediately as if she thought of something. "My husband likes children very much." She stood beside Li Yi and saw the genuine smile on his face. She could clearly feel his mood. It was a happiness that she had never seen before. She stared at him in a daze. Li Yi pushed the swing again and said, "Yes, it's so nice to have 1 or 2 children and a lively home." Rui nodded and said no more. At this moment, Li Yi carefully pushed the swing and didn't notice that Rui bit her lower lip and a flash of disappointment on her pretty face. Chapter 504. He, brother, come too. Princess Yongning slid down the long wooden slide and sat on a rocking cart in the shape of a sheep. She turned around and said to Li Yi. Li Yi stood not far away and looked at her with a smile. It was fine for a 5-year-old girl like Yongning to play with this, but it was shameful for a grown-up like him to ride on a sheep. If people were to find out about this, the headline on the front page of the Capital Daily tomorrow would be, "Shocking, a certain unscrupulous county uncle actually did such an indecent act with a female goat." His reputation as one of the 3 heroes of the capital would be completely ruined. They were now in a spacious room at the back of the small courtyard. These days, Li Yi asked the craftsmen to work overtime to turn this place into the world's first indoor playground. All the sharp edges were polished smooth wooden slides, a human-driven merry-go-round with seats inside, coin-operated rocking carts that were popular in the 21st century at the entrance of major supermarkets. The image of the sheep was carved by Li Yi himself. It was so lifelike that the most famous carpenter in Jingdu wanted to learn from him on the spot. At this moment, if there was a cute voice saying, "Little brother, come and play with me," it would be even more lifelike. There were huge ice mirrors in the 4 corners of the room. No matter how hot it was outside, there was still a cool breeze in the room. No matter how they moved, they were not afraid of sweating. Ah! Princess Shawning, who had been standing at the door for a long time, finally came to her senses. She screamed and rushed over. She sat on the merry-go-round and didn't let go. She looked around the room, and her crystal-clear eyes were shining. "Come down first." Li Yi walked over and said to her. "I won't." The arrogant girl stared at him and showed a pair of canine teeth, looking aggressive. Li Yi said helplessly, "This is not how you play with it." It was not easy to persuade her to come down and let Yongning get down from the rocking cart. Fang, who was operating the rocking cart, also walked over. He made some adjustments to the merry-go-round and let the 2 princesses sit on it. Fang stood far away, holding a thick handle and turning in a circle. The merry-go-round also turned, and the arrogant Loli's scream immediately sounded in the room. The merry-go-round in the future could move up and down as it spun, but to achieve such an effect, it would take more than a month. Even if it was done, old Fang, who had wrestled with a bear and won, would be exhausted to death. Even so, he had hired more than 10 carpenters to work day and night on this kind of work that could only be done in circles 2 days ago. Me too, I also want to get these things in the palace." The Tsundere Loli had already gone crazy from playing. She slid up and down the slide, screaming repeatedly. Old Fang rode on a pleasant goat, panting heavily. He was as tired as a dog. Young master. I can't." Fang's voice was trembling. He said, "Find a few more people." "This thing is too tiring." Li Yi looked at him and said, "Second granduncle said that you have to break through the limit in order to make progress. Otherwise, it will be a waste of talent." Fang kept shaking his head. "No, I don't want to make progress anymore. This work is not done by a human. Even a donkey would be good." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "That's right. I didn't think it through. Recently, there is a small gang in the Jade Yard that often makes trouble in several shops. I originally wanted you to keep an eye on it. Since you are so tired, then stay at home and have a good rest. Let Mrs. Fang make more delicious supplements for you. I will see if old Sue and the others have time. Fong got up from the pleasant goat and said angrily, What? Which small gang has the guts to make trouble for us? Young master, don't worry. I will definitely go and see more in the next few days. If they dare to come again, I will crush their balls. You'd better rest more. Li Yi shook his head and said, Remember to find a donkey later. Ordinary people can't turn this thing. Fong shook his head like a rattle drum. He waved his hand and said, Don't look for a donkey. I am here. That animal needs to eat, drink, and poop. It is dirty and troublesome. Besides, it is not good to scare children. Fong's face was full of righteousness. Second granduncle said that I have to break through the limit of physical strength. He is right. I will turn this thing. Fong went to inspect the territory around the jade yard. The proud Lolita changed into a less flamboyant dress and replaced the golden hairpin with a jade hairpin. She was led by Princess Royal Highness and walked on the street. She was curious about everything she saw. She bought a lot of things along the way. Several guards followed behind her were so full of things that they could hardly see the road. But today, the role of these guards was just to carry the bags. Several ordinary old men were scattered around and closely observed everything around. The imperial notice was posted yesterday. As of this morning, there are already nearly 1,000 people who have signed up. Mingzu turned to look at Li Yi and said, This is only the first day. In 10 days, the number of people who have signed up will be very terrifying. Li Yi was not surprised. The emperor valued mathematics so much that everyone in the court did not know about it. Naturally, it could not be hidden from the other students in the capital. This was a broad road to promotion. It was a shortcut that could not be more convenient. Mathematics was not valued before and there was a shortage of talents. It could be said that as long as one entered the mathematics school, they would not dare to ask for a promotion, but a promotion was inevitable. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, Let the Imperial College choose. We can't let just anyone in. 200 children of nobles and officials, 800 scholars from poor families. In the end, 1 in 10 will be chosen. Mingzu agreed with Li Yi's suggestion and said, I will go back to the palace and report to my father. But out of the 1,000 people, there are only 200 children of nobles and officials. Isn't that too little? Who did not want a share of the pie in the mathematics school? Mingzu knew that if it were not for her father's rule that there had to be places for scholars from poor families, the officials would probably want the mathematics school to be filled with their people. Li Yi said, It doesn't matter. I am the superintendent. If anyone has an opinion, let them come to me. Mingzhu's mouth opened slightly, but she still did not say anything. Li Yi was different from all the noble officials. He was in the court, but he was also outside of it. Other than her father, no one had the right to order him around. The mathematics school was not under the jurisdiction of any department. Unless her father spoke, no one could change his decision. However, her father would definitely approve of reducing the number of children of officials and would not object. Brothel, is this a brothel? The proud Lolita shouted again. She pulled Li Yi and said, Let's go in and listen to the opera. I want to see the white snake, I want to see the green snake, and that monkey who can dance with a stick. The sky was getting dark. Although the proud Lolita still wanted to experience the nightlife in the capital, she did not have 2 months of vacation. She had to go back before the palace doors closed. Li Yi put down the sleeping Yong Ning and tucked her in. He walked out of the door and rubbed his sore shoulders. He let out a long sigh. They were both princesses. Yong Ning and Shaning only differed by 1 word. How could their personalities be so different? No, Princess Shaning was not a princess at all. She was a country girl who was entering the city for the first time. After a whole day, she even reminded herself that the next time she came, she still had to catch fish in the river and chase rabbits in the mountains. It's not good to be lively. Li Yi murmured. He regretted what he said yesterday. Chapter 505. Contrary to Li Yi's expectations, Xiao Huan only used 7 days to completely become one with the two princesses. She didn't even need half a month, or even a month. The reason why it was two princesses was that the proud Lolita had taken going out of the palace as a routine, which meant that she had to eat 3 meals a day every day. Fishing in the water and chasing rabbits in the mountains could no longer satisfy her playfulness. She was also tired of the limited facilities in the indoor playground, which made Fang heave a long sigh of relief. Every night when he came home, he was so tired that he didn't even have the strength to move his fingers. His wife asked him several times suspiciously. After knowing the truth, she nagged second uncle for being a busybody, but the suspicion on his face lessened a lot. Li Yi also breathed a sigh of relief. Ever since that Tsundere Loli learned how to flip the flower rope, but she could not beat Xiao Huan no matter how hard she tried, she became obsessed with this game. It seemed like she would not give up until she won a round. Li Yi used to think that if he had a daughter in the future, he would raise her like a princess. Now this belief was a little shaken. Fortunately, Xiao Huan was with him, so she didn't torture herself anymore. Yongning was also with them. 2 days ago, they added a small Duanwu festival, so Li Yi was rarely free. Rui seemed to have something on her mind these days. When asked, she always shook her head. Her wife was the most important. She didn't care about the little guys anymore. She dragged her out to watch a few shows, inspected the progress of second Mrs. Business, and looked at the shops that the family had opened almost all over the capital. It seemed that the strategy to relax didn't work. Rui was not like second young Mistress Lu. She did not want to be the Chancellor of Wulin, nor did she want to be the king of mountain bandits. Li Yi thought she was homesick. She wanted to wait for these 2 months to pass and everything to settle down before returning to Qing, and Manor to stay for a while. Every time he thought of this, he always had a strange feeling, as if he had forgotten something important. Seeing Changde and a few eunuchs standing in the yard, Li Yi asked curiously, "Steward Chang, why are you here again?" Changde's eyelids twitched as he said, "County Uncle Li, have you forgotten something?" "What is it?" Li Yi looked at him in confusion. Changde asked coldly, "Director Li, do you really not remember anything at all? Who are you calling a eunuch?" Li Yi looked at him angrily. When did this old fellow become so insidious? Changde's robes fluttered even though there was no wind. He was somewhat unable to suppress the jinqi in his body. After a long time, he took a deep breath and said slowly, 2 days later, the Imperial College has finished selecting the 200 children of officials and 800 students from poor families to participate in the examination. Has Uncle Li thought about the questions for the examination? Oh, so it's about this matter. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Just think about how important the Academy's enrollment is. How can it be decided so easily? These days, I've been meditating day and night, working my heart out." "So, you already have the questions?" Changde looked at him and asked. "No." Li Yi shook his head. "Chang, did you bring the list of 200 people?" Li Yi sat at the table and casually asked Changde. "If you use that kind of reason to fool His Majesty again, I won't be able to protect you." Changde took out a booklet from his sleeve and placed it on the table. He looked at Li Yi and said lightly, "His Majesty went against the majority's opinion and decided on the list of 800 scholars from poor families. It was already very difficult. There can't be any more mistakes in this matter." "How can that be?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "We can't be superstitious. We have to believe in science." "Oh, right, you followed His Majesty for so many years, you must be very familiar with the officials and nobles in the capital, right? Come, Chief Chang, can I trouble you to introduce them to me? Which family do these people belong to?" Although there were some records in the small notebook, the vast majority of these 200 people were unfamiliar names. A small notebook alone was not enough. Chang looked at him and very irresponsibly left. Li Yi did not get the results he wanted, but it was not important. He looked at the eunuchs who stayed behind to copy the papers and waved to them. "You guys, come over." Although these eunuchs were all in the palace, they were not unfamiliar with the matters of the court. They were even more familiar with the names in the booklet. After more than an hour, the booklet that Changde brought over was densely marked by Li Yi. In fact, Chang did not have to worry about the questions at all. Li Yi was lacking in everything but questions. The 6th grade mathematics workbook. Is this level too difficult for them? Forget it, I'll just choose the 3rd grade's workbook. 15 minutes later, yes, done. Which shelf was the advanced mathematics workbook I saw last time? Isn't it too easy to ask for the limit? Forget it, I don't want the triple points. Just 1 double point is not too much, right? There was no shortage of news in the capital. Even the competition between the two countries that had attracted everyone's attention had died down in a few days. Almost no one mentioned it. Other than the gossip about a certain assistant minister and a certain brothel girl, the hottest topic in recent days was the emperor's decision to open a new calculation school outside of the Imperial College, opening the door for students from poor families. As long as one could pass the entrance examination, they would become a real student of the School of Mathematics. Their status would be the same as the students of the Imperial College. In terms of future prospects, entering the School of Mathematics would be much more promising than entering the Imperial College. After all, people who were proficient in mathematics were scarce nowadays. The students had studied hard for more than 10 years, all for the sake of one day being able to obtain an official position and bring honor to their ancestors. Now that there was a shortcut in front of them, how could they not be excited and infatuated? The students who had passed the first round of screening were extremely excited and actively prepared for the upcoming final examination. Those who did not pass the first round were beating their chests and stamping their feet in regret. Any scholar would more or less come into contact with mathematics. However, everyone valued it differently. Mathematics had always been neglected, and no one was willing to waste time and effort to study it. They did not expect the government's policy to change so suddenly. Mathematics, which no one cared about, became a hot topic overnight. It really caught them off guard. Of course, the children of the officials did not have such worries. This was just a game between the nobles in the capital and the officials in the court. The so-called examination was just a formality, at least that was what they thought. Seeing Changde put a locked box in the carriage, Li Yi said, "The examination procedures and grading rules are all inside. Just let them follow it." Changde put the box away and turned to look at Li Yi. He asked, as a supervisor, "I'm afraid it's not appropriate for you not to be present for the examination, right?" Li Yi pointed at the arrogant Lolita who was waiting impatiently not far away. He said, "It's not that I can't come, but I already promised to go fishing with Princess Shawning today. Do you want to go talk to her? Let's go." Changde simply turned around, flipped himself onto the horse and lashed out with his whip without any hesitation. Chapter 506. Who didn't want to reach the top in a single step? There were many students who wanted to enter the mathematics school. Even if the directorate went through layers of screening, there were still a total of 1,000 people who participated in the final examination. With so many people, the examination venue naturally couldn't be the palace. However, the security of the examination venue was not inferior to that of the palace at all. Even a proper imperial examination was not as strict as this. There were 1,000 candidates, and there were 10 different sets of questions. There were 100 people in each examination venue, and each candidate would be given a different set of questions. This made the possibility of cheating extremely low. Changde had once questioned the fairness of this method to Li Yi, and the answer he received was that luck was also a form of strength. Among the 10 sets of questions, there were indeed some that were extremely difficult, but in general, the difficulty level was quite high. Changde didn't know what the difficulty level was, but he understood what Li Yi meant. If he got a difficult question under such circumstances, it could only mean that he was unlucky. It was better for unlucky people not to enter the imperial court. He just didn't know who the unlucky ones would be. However, this wasn't something he should worry about. What he needed to do was to follow Li Yi's arrangement step by step. There were still 2 hours before the official start of the examination. Many people had already gathered under the high wall outside the examination venue. Many of the examinees pointed at the red paper pasted on the high wall. I was assigned to the 10th examination venue, number 35. Look for me, there are so many names. My eyes are getting dizzy from looking at them. The examination rules were written very clearly. Everyone had to find their examination venue and seat before the examination. Many people stuck their heads out to look at the wall. I found it too, the 5th examination venue, number 1. It's actually number 1. I'm impressed. I'm also in the 5th examination venue, but I'm number 2. I'm only one number away from you. Thank you. You're actually very impressive too. Seeing the two young people complimenting each other, a supervisor from the Ministry of Rights walked over and glanced at the crowd. He said, the examination venue and seat numbers are randomly assigned. What are you guys impressed about? The two of them blushed after failing to show off and went elsewhere. In the same examination venue, they would probably have a lot in common in the next 2 hours. May I ask, sir, why aren't there the 1st and 2nd examination venues? A plainly dressed young man asked curiously. The supervisor looked at him and said, why isn't your name on there? The supervisor shook his head. I've already found it, it's in the 10th examination venue. Then don't ask so many questions. The head of the Ministry of Rights said coldly and left. While the young man was still in a daze, someone sighed and said, brother, there's no need to ask just now. Isn't it obvious? The 1st and 2nd examination halls are all filled with the children of officials. It has nothing to do with us. Everyone present was from a poor family and did not have any powerful background. Therefore, they especially cherished this opportunity. They arrived at the entrance of the examination hall early. Many people in the crowd shook their heads and sighed. Every single one of those people's fathers were influential officials of the dynasty. How could they compare to them? Moreover, many of them were well aware that the majority of the spots for the academy's recruitment this time would probably be given to these people. As for them, it was still unknown how many of them would be able to enter. Since the allocation is arbitrary, why are the first 2 examination halls filled with the descendants of officials? A student said indignantly, this time, I'm afraid it's their one-man show again. That's impossible. I heard that His Majesty has won a lot of places for us poor students this time. County Uncle Lee has only given 200 places for the children of officials in today's examination. No matter how I look at it, we have more chances. The people that the students from poor families were most grateful to were His Majesty and County Supervisor Lee of the School of Mathematics. His Majesty had been very kind to the students from poor families in recent years. His various decrees and measures had given hope to many scholars from poor families. Although County Uncle Lee was about the same age as them, what he had done had earned him absolute respect from the hearts of these people. Especially this time, it was obvious that County Uncle Lee intended to support the students from poor families in the enrollment of the arithmetic college, which made people's respect for him turn into gratitude. Everyone remained silent in response to the young student's question. How could this matter be so simple? The influential officials obviously wouldn't give these important spots to others. If they couldn't even fight for it themselves, how could these people from poor families have a chance? It couldn't be any easier for them to get the spots. There was still a quarter of an hour before the examination started, and the candidates were allowed to enter. At this moment, a sedan chair finally appeared in the distance. Some young people with extraordinary temperament walked over in groups of 3 to 5, talking and laughing. Brother Chin, why are you here? I have no choice. No one from my family wants to come, so the old man directly appointed me. Do you also want to enter the School of Mathematics? Alas, me too. Second uncle said that talents in mathematics are scarce, and the School of Mathematics will definitely soar in the future. No matter what, I have to get in. Someone came from afar and brought these people to the examination room. They were arranged to sit down according to the order that had been arranged in advance. Don't make noise in the examination room. More than 10 palace guards stood in the examination room with cold expressions. No matter how arrogant and despotic these children of officials were, they could only obediently shut their mouths at this moment. Even the palace guards were sent here, which showed that His Majesty attached great importance to this recruitment. However, they were not worried about the results. Those who were sent here by their families were naturally not idiots. In terms of educational resources, they were much richer than those from poor families. Under the premise of fair competition, even if they did not use their power to suppress others, they would still be able to win easily. After a gong sounded, an official from the Ministry of Rights took out the unopened examination papers. The palace guards checked them and distributed them to everyone according to the numbers on them. Among the students from poor families, there were some who were happy when they opened the test papers, but there were even more who were frowning. The questions weren't the new mathematics that they were worried about, but they were much more difficult than the ones they had seen in the past. After glancing at it, they felt that they wouldn't be able to solve many problems in 2 hours. Faced with similar questions, the children of officials in the first 2 examination halls performed slightly better than the students from poor families. Many people had already begun to answer confidently. However, there were also some people whose expressions were not the same as everyone else's. The second son of the Chen family, Chen Lisan, looked at his examination paper and suddenly felt dizzy. He didn't have the courage to take a second look. What exactly were these scribbles that looked like talismans? He couldn't understand a single question in the entire examination paper. Limit, double integral, derivative. He could understand these words, but what did they mean when they were put together? The expression on Chen's face was extremely blank. There were many people who had the same expression. The fourth son of the Qin family, Qin Feng, the second son of the Cui family, Cui Shixin, the son of the assistant minister of works, Li Jianren, they picked up their pens but couldn't write. They looked around and saw the people around them writing. After a short moment of shock, they began to doubt their lives. Are they all so good? Chapter 507. Chen Lisan had been holding the pen for a quarter of an hour, but he was still unable to write. He angrily put down the pen in his hand and wondered if those people had memorized the answers in advance. Even the mathematics doctors of the Imperial College might not be able to solve these questions. He was not far from Qin Feng. When he turned his head to take a look, Qin Feng was also looking at him. Chen Lisan opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, a cold voice came from beside him. Those who look left and right and whisper to each other will be treated as cheating. The palace guards in charge of maintaining the discipline of the examination hall did not care whether the other party was the son or grandson of a duke or a minister. They were under the command of the emperor and dared to reprimand even the princes. Chen Lisan's expression froze. He obediently lowered his head and glanced at the paper, and then closed his eyes. This examination was jointly organized by the Imperial College and the Ministry of Rights. The minister of the Ministry of Rights attached great importance to this. He looked at Changde with a slightly serious expression and said, "Supervisor Chang, in order to prevent cheating, should we send more people to patrol the examination hall?" The examination this time was completely different from the imperial examinations. There were more than 100 students in each examination hall, and they were seated next to each other. The distance was not far, and it was easy to see each other. His Majesty attached great importance to this examination. If there was any cheating, he would have to bear the responsibility. Cheating? Changde calmly sat on the main seat and said, "That's impossible. They will never cheat in County Uncle Li's mathematics examination in their lifetime." Changde's words were very certain. The minister of the Ministry of Rights was still suspicious, but he also thought of something else. Logically speaking, County Uncle Li, as the college supervisor, had to participate in the academy's entrance examination. But today, he had not seen County Uncle Li at all. Could it be that there was something more important to him today? Compared to the minister of the Ministry of Rights, the mathematics doctors of the Imperial College were quite relaxed. They were drinking tea and chatting in a side hall. The mathematics department of the Imperial College had temporarily merged with the mathematics department. They would be teachers of the mathematics department in the future. Although they would still have to learn mathematics from County Uncle Li for a period of time, they would not have to go through the examinations like the people outside. I wonder how difficult their exam questions are. A mathematics PhD said curiously. County Uncle Lee's questions had always been unique. If the questions this time were the same as the last exam for the Imperial College's mathematics students, then the school would not be able to fill the quota of 100 students. Another doctor walked to the side and said, "There are still a few test questions here." The exam questions were strictly confidential. Before the exam began, only Li Xianbo knew about it. The Imperial College doctor distributed several copies of the exam questions and took one for himself. Lord Li's question this time is quite standard. Although it's easier than last time, it won't be easy to answer all of them correctly. This time, it's only for the Academy's enrollment. Naturally, there won't be any strange questions. Lord Li also knows his limits. Looking at his colleague speaking with fervor and assurance, the other mathematics doctor in the corner looked a little stunned. What are they talking about? I don't understand them at all. The question was very simple. Could it be that he had gotten a fake test? Sir Han, he said to a colleague beside him. That person turned around and asked, Sir Wu, what's the matter? Let me have a look at your test paper. Yi Zichen said. These 2 hours were the shortest 2 hours in many people's lives, but also the longest 2 hours in some people's lives. Sigh, give me another hour, no, just a quarter of an hour, and I'll be able to solve that question, a shabbily dressed young man said with a regretful expression. His colleague patted his shoulder and said, 2 hours is a little short. I also haven't solved one question, but don't worry, most people should be the same as us. The two of them encouraged each other and immediately felt a sense of appreciation for each other. That was close. I only solved the last question a quarter of an hour before the gong sounded. I only checked it briefly. Another young man walked out with a face full of lingering fear. When he saw the two of them, he asked, Brother Zheng, Brother Wang, how are you guys? Hey, Brother Zheng, Brother Wang, don't go. Everyone who came out of the examination room had different expressions. Some were happy, some were disappointed, and some were confused. Although they only needed to go home and wait for the name list to be posted tomorrow, no one left. They checked their answers with people they knew. It didn't take long for them to discover something very surprising. That's not right. Why didn't I get this question? Are our test papers different? I didn't get any of the questions you two mentioned just now. Mine is the same as this brother's, I understand. Although the questions are different, the solutions are actually similar. If you know one, you will definitely know the other. There's no need to argue. The person who set the questions must have done this on purpose to avoid cheating. After understanding this, everyone began to look for their own groups. Not long after, small groups appeared outside the examination room. At this moment, people walked out of the two examination rooms in the front. Many of the people who walked out first had dispirited expressions on their faces. Sitting there bored for 2 hours was also very unbearable. These 2 hours, to them, were longer than a day. That limit. Just as Chen Lisan opened his mouth, Qin Feng shook his head and said, Don't talk about it. I don't understand it. That score, never heard of it either. A few people gathered together and received the same answer. Not a single question was changed. The test papers were numbered. They didn't even need to write their names. The test papers were handed in the same way as they were handed out. I don't believe that they can answer all of them. Li Jianren slapped his thigh and stopped a person. Ma Jia, how many questions did you solve? He was from a family of generals, while scumbag Li's father was a civil official. The two of them usually didn't have much interaction. However, they were in a good mood today. The questions were just what they wanted. Ma Jia laughed and said, I answered all of them. Li Jianren was stunned. This second son of the Ma family had a reputation of being a horse stick. He was never good at studying. They couldn't even answer a single question. How could he solve all of them? It was simply the biggest joke in the world. Seeing that Li Jianren didn't believe him at all, Ma Jia snorted and said, If I answered the question about the transportation of troops and food incorrectly, wouldn't my father break my leg? After saying that, he glanced at Li Jianren with disdain and walked away. After being stunned for a moment, Li Jianren finally understood something. He immediately walked over and said to the others, "Our questions are different." "Got it." Qin Feng nodded. He pointed to the crowd and said, "It's indeed different. I'm afraid we've drawn a difficult question. His Majesty is indeed more biased towards the poor." Li Jianren said indignantly, "Ma Jia, that kid is really lucky." Chen Lisan opened his mouth and said, "Let's go and see where the people like us are." The dozen or so people walked towards the crowd. After a moment, they walked back. Looking at the teams of at least 100 people, and then looking at the dozen or so of them, everyone's face was gloomy. If they still couldn't understand how lucky they were, their heads would be useless. Chapter 508. This. Who can answer this? In the side hall, the mathematics professors of the Imperial College looked at each other with a test paper in their hands. County Uncle Li's attainments in mathematics were something that they could only look up to. He was also the supervisor of the College of Mathematics. The admission test was completed by him alone, so the mathematics department of the Imperial College could not intervene. However, if anything happened, the students would come to them first, not County Uncle Li. They were confused by this test paper. It would be an exaggeration to say that they were confused. In fact, they had no clue about the answers, let alone the students. If the students were to cause trouble, it would be troublesome. "Young masters, you can't go in. Please allow me to inform them first." There was a commotion outside the door. Qin Feng, Chen Lisan, and the others waved away the servants at the door and strode in. "What's the matter?" A mathematics professor looked at them and asked. Qin Feng and Chen Lisan's status in their respective families was slightly lower than that of young Duke Qin and young Duke Chen. However, these dozen people added up together could not be underestimated. "We need an explanation about this test paper." The one who spoke was Chen Lisan. His words were filled with a strong sense of questioning. Before they came in, they had already asked the others. Although most of the test papers were different, the difficulty was almost the same. Some only changed a few numbers. However, when it came to them, the questions were extremely difficult. More than a dozen people added up together could not even solve one question. "What test?" the mathematics professor said. As if he thought of something, his body suddenly shook and a look of shock appeared on his face. He suddenly turned around and pulled a test paper over. He asked, "Is this your test paper?" "Yes." After Chen Lisan looked at it, he nodded and said, "Would like to ask, why is it that the difficulty of everyone's test is the same, but only our test is so difficult? I would like to ask for an explanation." Professor Han looked at the dozen people in front of him, the second son of Duke Chen, Chen Lisan, Qin Feng, Cui Shixin, and the son of Assistant Minister Li from the Ministry of Works, Li Jianren. "Why are these names so familiar?" Professor Han opened his mouth but found that he had no words to refute them. "It's already so obvious. What's the point of explaining? You don't even know that you're already very lucky to be able to participate in the exam today. Do you really think you can get into the Mathematics Academy? One of them lacks earth of the 5 elements, one of them has a flawed character, and one of them is a lunatic. How can such people enter the school of divination? Who gave you the confidence to do so? With Li County Earl here, even your names are wrong." "I can't explain this to you," Professor Han said helplessly. Not far away, Changda, who had already noticed the abnormality, walked over with a frown. Princess Shaning probably lacked a childhood. She could even yell and scream when she was fishing, let alone when she saw the slide and the rocking car for the first time. Her eyes lit up. Unfortunately, her luck didn't seem to be good. It had already been 2 hours, and even Yongning had caught a fish half the length of a finger with her small fishing rod. The arrogant Lolita still hadn't caught anything. "If you're done playing, go back." Li Yi walked out of a simple pergola and handed her a piece of iced watermelon. Although the weather wasn't hot and there was a small shelter above her head to shade her from the sun, Her hair was still a little wet after sitting outside for 2 hours. The arrogant Lolita handed the fishing rod to Li Yi and held the watermelon in her hands. She said in a muffled voice, "I want to change places. The feng shui here isn't good, I can't catch fish." Li Yi lifted the fishing rod and looked at her, saying, "If you still insist on fishing with Tang Hulu, unless Manager Chang jumps down and personally hangs one for you, it's useless to change to another one." He propped the fishing rod on the ground and looked at Changda, who was walking over. "Is the exam over?" "It's over." Changda nodded his head and said, "The Directorate of Directorates will read through all the exam papers according to your answers before tomorrow and select the top 100. The mathematics exam papers were different from the imperial examination papers. If they were right, they were right. If they were wrong, they were wrong. It was easy to grade them. Thus, the emperor had ordered them to finish reading them within half a day and to have results the next day. Changda thought for a moment and said, "If you do this, you will offend many people." Li Yi didn't seem to care at all. "If I don't do this, I won't offend them?" Changda thought about it. Li Yi had already offended the king of Shu, the Qin family, and the Qin family, so he was destined to stand on the opposite side of some people in the imperial court, no matter what he did or didn't do. He suddenly didn't know what to say. After a long time, he said, "The emperor said that you will settle the matters in the imperial court tomorrow yourself." "What else?" "Before the morning court, I will eat with the emperor in the imperial garden." After saying this, Changda left. The proud Lolita used Yongming's fishing rod and finally caught the first fish in her life. She was so excited that she jumped up and down. Li Yi suddenly thought of something important and waved at Changda, who had already mounted the horse. "What else is there?" Changda stopped the horse in time and looked at him and asked. Li Yi hesitated and said, "That. Remember to tell the imperial chef not to cook the white fungus and lotus seed soup tomorrow." "Won't the emperor get tired of drinking it every day? That's all you want to say?" Changda's expression didn't look very good. "Of course not." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Also, you must remind them not to put coriander in the soup." Swish. Changda whipped the horse. It let out a long neigh in pain and quickly disappeared from Li Yi's sight. "How is Yongming's condition?" Emperor Jing's complexion was good. At least his mood didn't seem to be that bad. He asked about Princess Yongming. "Princess Yongming's heart has been closed for too long. These days, I have tried my best to let her come into contact with the outside world. It has been quite effective. I think she should be able to recover in 2 months." Under the premise of treating the disease, fishing, watching the play, and chasing rabbits were all legitimate reasons. "Has Shanning caused you trouble these days?" Emperor Jing had already drunk the second bowl of porridge and suddenly asked. Li Yi shook his head and said against his will, "No, Princess Shanning is naive and lively. She still has a childish heart and is just a little playful. She didn't cause me any trouble, only a fool would complain about his daughter in front of the old emperor. If the empress were to find out about this, it would really cause trouble for her." Emperor Jing looked up at him and said, "You have caused me a lot of trouble. Don't talk while eating, and don't talk while sleeping. You have to concentrate on eating. Although Lao Chang is ugly, he is quite reliable. As expected, there is no coriander in the porridge today. The cook of the catering bureau is worthy of praise. When I leave later, I will take 2 cucumbers as a reward." When he received a lot of memorials to impeach Li Yi, Emperor Jing understood what Changda meant that day. It was not rare for the officials to fight openly and covertly. Emperor Jing had seen this before, but this was the first time he had seen it so simply, directly, and so brazenly. Li Yi was still the same Li Yi. No matter what he did, he would always be unexpected. He casually created such a big trouble for himself. "I want to see if you can continue to be like this in court." Emperor Jing glanced at him, stood up, and said, "Prepare to go to court." He intended to let Li Yi feel what it was like to face the censure of so many officials alone. He hoped that this time, he could wear off some of his edge. "No loyalty," Li Yi put down his chopsticks and sighed. Wasn't it what the old emperor had been doing to weaken the power of Prime Minister Qin? Now, even among the people who would hold important positions in the academy in the future, Prime Minister Qin could not even get a hair. He was obviously happy in his heart, but now he blamed himself. Was there such a reason in the world? Although the military book was currently limited to the royal family and the family of generals and could not be widely spread, there would come a day when it would become famous. Although the few of them would not be able to leave their names in the world like the author of the military book, at least there would be people who would remember them. This was more than enough for these old generals who had fought their entire lives. "Kid, what you've done this time is to this old man's liking." Old General Shui looked at him and praised, "That bunch of rotten scholars like to play dirty in the dark, unlike us, the family of generals, who are so straightforward." The few old generals had always treated Li Yi as a disciple of the family of generals, but the red-faced general was not like old General Shui. He looked at Li Yi with a slightly serious expression and said, "Although this will vent your anger, it will also offend many people. You are still young and do not understand the pros and cons of this. Even His Majesty will be put in a difficult position. In a while, I'm afraid that many people will step forward to impeach you. Remember not to be stubborn. As long as you take a step back, His Majesty will protect you. This junior understands." Li Yi nodded. These old generals looked rough, but they were actually very meticulous. Their love for him was not fake and they had already taught him many things about being an official. After waiting for a full 15 minutes, the old emperor slowly appeared from the back of the hall. The current emperor was the most diligent emperor in the history of the Jing kingdom. Since the day he ascended the throne, except for some major celebrations, activities, and health reasons, he had been attending the morning court almost every day. Today, as usual, a few officials from several provinces made a simple report. Seeing that there was nothing important to report, Emperor Jing looked down and asked, "How is the enrollment of the Imperial Academy?" The Chancellor of the Imperial Academy, who was in charge of this matter, heard this and stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, the enrollment of the Imperial Academy has been completed yesterday. There were 1,000 people who participated in the examination. According to the results of the examination, the top 100 were admitted. Among them, there were 66 people from poor families. The specific name list has been posted outside the palace gate." As soon as the Chancellor of the Imperial Academy said this, there was a sudden commotion among the officials. Among the 100 people, there were 66 people from poor families. Didn't that mean that there were only 34 people from the officials? Although the majority of the people who participated in the examination were from poor families, this result was still far beyond their expectations. Emperor Jing was also quite surprised by this result. These two numbers were more or less the same. Could it be that Li Yi deliberately made things difficult for the children of the officials? "Your Majesty, this official has a memorial." A voice suddenly came from the crowd. Everyone saw Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Work stand up and say, "This official impeaches Supervisor Li Yi of the Imperial Academy. In the enrollment, he was unfair and deliberately made things difficult for some of the candidates. I hope Your Majesty will investigate this." After Assistant Minister Li stood up, several people immediately followed him. The reason for the impeachment was exactly the same. Supervisor Li Yi of the Imperial Academy did not follow the principle of fairness and justice in the enrollment process of the Imperial Academy. He was unscrupulous and deliberately made things difficult for some candidates. He really let down His Majesty and the Imperial Court's trust in him. The Qin family, the Cui family, and the Qin family did not stand up. The officials immediately understood. What they wanted was obviously not to punish County Supervisor Li, but to fight for more benefits for them through this reason. Emperor Jing sat above and glanced around. He said, "Where is Li Yi?" There was no sound in the court. The officials turned their heads and looked around until an official couldn't help but reach out and push the young man leaning against the pillar. He whispered, "Supervisor Li, His Majesty is calling you." Li Yi covered his mouth and yawned. He quickly walked to the front and bowed. "This official is here." Emperor Jing looked at him and asked, there are officials who impeached you for deliberately making things difficult for some of the candidates and being unfair in the enrollment of the Imperial Academy. Is this true? This official was confused for a moment. Li nodded. Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Work's hand froze in his sleeve. He originally wanted to take out the evidence after Li denied it. He did not expect him to admit it so easily, which disrupted his next plan. Many officials shook their heads. County Supervisor Li was still too young. He only did things on impulse. This time, those people would not easily let him go. Emperor Jing opened his mouth and did not know how to continue for a while. According to his idea, he wanted to use this matter to sharpen Li Yi's edges and make him more stable in the future. But he did not expect that he would admit it so easily. How should I punish you for personal reasons? After a long time, Emperor Jing spoke again. Li Yi looked solemn and sincere. He said, "This official is wrong. As the supervisor of the Imperial Academy, this official has failed to live up to the trust of the Imperial Court and Your Majesty's expectations and cultivation. This official feels that he can no longer bear this heavy responsibility. I beg Your Majesty to allow this official to resign from the position of supervisor of the Imperial Academy and go home to reflect." Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Work stood in the same place with a blank expression. How could this be? Things should not develop like this. Chapter 5:10. After learning that their children were deliberately made difficult by Li Yi, the supervisor of the arithmetic college, the first reaction of these powerful officials was naturally anger. There were 200 children of officials participating in the examination this time. Why didn't he make things difficult for others, but them? He was so blatant and unscrupulous. He obviously didn't put them in his eyes. Even if this county early was favored by the emperor, there were many people who were favored by the emperor. Which one of them wasn't careful and treading on thin ice? It was the first time that they saw someone being so arrogant because of the emperor's favor. However, although they were angry, this matter was not a bad thing for them, although it was a little embarrassing. He broke the rules like this, even His Majesty couldn't protect and condone him indefinitely. At that time, everyone in the imperial court would collectively make things difficult for him. Maybe they could grasp some more chips in the arithmetic college. However, no one expected that County Earl Li Yi's attitude of admitting his mistake was so sincere. He didn't resist and didn't defend himself. He was wrong, so he resigned. Compared with those who, after making a mistake, walked around and used all kinds of means to avoid trouble, County Earl Li was simply an example of the officials. But why couldn't they help but want to scold him? Why did His Majesty set up another arithmetic college outside of the Imperial College? Why was County Earl Li the supervisor instead of others? It was because in the whole Jing kingdom, no one understood the new mathematics except him. If he resigned, the arithmetic college would be useless. Looking at the several people standing in front of them, who were just impeaching County Earl Li, but now became speechless, many officials sighed in their hearts. County Earl Li obviously didn't care about the position of the supervisor of the arithmetic college. The reason why today's matter happened was because of their impeachment a few days ago. The situation in the imperial court at that time was so similar to today. Now, his attitude was also very clear. Either you go, or I go. You can impeach him slowly. I'll go back first, and everyone had a strange feeling that he seemed to be looking forward to his resignation. Jing Di's eyes twitched. He took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down and said, "So, you admit that you deliberately made things difficult for the examinees?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "That set of test papers was used by me to select students with the greatest talent in mathematics. I have high hopes for these students. If they can solve one of the questions, I will definitely enroll them into the School of Mathematics and seriously train them. I didn't think it through. I didn't expect it to have such serious consequences. I don't have the face to stay in the School of Mathematics anymore. Your Majesty, please allow me to resign." These words were spoken with extreme sincerity. Naturally, the officials did not believe him. This was too much of a coincidence. The people who received the difficult questions were all people who had offended him before. Who would believe that this wasn't revenge? But even if they didn't believe him, they couldn't expose him. If Li Xianbo resigned, what would be the point of the existence of the mathematics college? Who would train excellent mathematicians for the country? Their families had already been recruited by the mathematics college. Wouldn't they have taken the test in vain? At this time, a directorate professor suddenly stood up and bowed. He said, "Your Majesty, Magistrate Li is eager to seek talents. Everything he did was for the sake of our Jing kingdom. If he is punished because of this, won't it disappoint the officials in the court?" Magistrate Han is right. This matter can't be blamed on Magistrate Li. Another directorate professor immediately stood up. Once the mathematics college was gone, the heavy burden would be on their shoulders. This was absolutely unacceptable. "Your Majesty, I agree." Another official stood up. Magistrate Li is dedicated to recruiting talents for the country. What's wrong with that? Suddenly, there were many voices in the court. Those officials all tried to persuade Magistrate Li. Their opinions were surprisingly unanimous. County Magistrate Li was not wrong to want to select high-level talents for the country. Was it wrong? Before the court, they had already seen the list of students from the mathematics college. Their sons and nephews were impressively on the list. The mathematics college was a good place. The Ministry of Revenue, Ministry of Works. Many important departments in the court were short of mathematicians. The emperor attached great importance to the newly established mathematics college. It wouldn't be long before there would be a reform in the court. At that time, those who graduated from the mathematics college would be in high demand. At this time, how could the superintendent of the mathematics college resign? In the imperial court, the winds changed abruptly. Those who had accused Li Yi just now retreated silently and did not speak again. Obviously, neither the officials nor the emperor would think that a few spoiled brats were more important than the superintendent of the mathematics college. In other words, they would definitely suffer this loss. What a good way to advance by retreating. Prime Minister Qin walked out of the palace gate and praised. But what about Feng Er? A man next to Prime Minister Qin hesitated and said, "It has already been arranged." When he comes out of the mathematics college, Prime Minister Qin waved his hand and said, "The list has already been posted. How can it be changed so easily? What will the poor scholars who entered the mathematics college think? What will the people of the world think?" The man was speechless. He fiercely punched the wall and said, "How can he be so brazen? I'm afraid that the emperor also wants this." Prime Minister Qin looked into the distance and murmured. He then walked away with his hands clasped behind his back. The man stayed where he was and a trace of fierceness flashed in his eyes. Does County Uncle Li really not care about the position of superintendent? An official walked out of the palace hall and asked in confusion. This is retreating in order to advance. Someone next to him casually said, "Even if he really resigns, will the emperor agree?" Other than County Uncle Li, who else can fill that position? The Qin family, Chen family, and Chui family are really unlucky this time. The official sighed and said, "The Qin family and the Li family have been enemies for a long time. The young duke of the Qin family and County Uncle Li are also enemies. As for the Chui family, I've never heard of them having any grievances with County Uncle Li. In short, don't provoke County Uncle Li in the future. Don't you see it clearly?" The person next to him suddenly looked at him. "What?" The official looked puzzled. "The King of Shu." The man lowered his voice and said, "The King of Shu is the cause of all this." The official was stunned for a while and his face suddenly changed. "It's impossible. He is young and has no background. How can he participate in such a big event? Moreover, I've never heard of him and I heard that the emperor will also put several princes in the College of Mathematics to study together." Hearing this news, the official suddenly stopped talking. It seemed that he thought of something terrible and his face turned pale. Jean, without any background, His Majesty was his biggest background. This time, he deliberately targeted a powerful official who was close to the King of Shu, but His Majesty didn't care about it at all. Instead, His Majesty played down the matter, which made the courtiers start to wonder which one was His Majesty's biological son, the King of Shu or County Early. No matter who participated in the fight for the throne, he usually didn't have a good ending, provided that he could bet on the right person. The Qin family, the Cui family, the Qin family and some powerful officials obviously bet on the King of Shu. As for County Uncle Li, who was extremely favored by the emperor, it was very scary to think about it. Before this, the officials almost fought with each other to get a place in the College of Mathematics, which showed its importance. However, for some unspeakable reason, County Uncle Li, as the supervisor of the College of Mathematics, excluded all the people who were related to the King of Shu from the College of Mathematics. One of the officials suddenly realized that he seemed to have discovered something extraordinary. Chapter 5:11. An assistant minister from the Ministry of Works walked out of the palace in a daze. He felt as if his soul was about to leave his body. He had made thorough preparations. There shouldn't have been any mistakes. However, just now, when he took the first step, things started to go out of his control. In fact, during this period of time, they had used many methods, both openly and secretly. But in the end, the King of Shu was no longer the King of Shu. County Magistrately was still the same, but County Magistrately had become County Magistrately. This fact really made people feel helpless. Officially, what should we do? A colleague beside him asked in a daze. The assistant minister didn't answer. He was just an errand boy. How could he know what to do next? Go to Qin's mansion. After a long time, he gritted his teeth and said. They didn't have the right to speak on this matter. They didn't get a place in the College of Mathematics. Prime Minister Qin wouldn't let this happen. The King of Shu's faction always listened to Prime Minister Qin's words. He was not the only one who was anxious at this moment. Some people were dejected, while others were proud of their success. Although most of the 100 students in the College of Mathematics were from poor families, they were still lacking compared to the families of officials. Even if they graduated from the College of Mathematics in the future, their development in official career would not be comparable to that of the children of officials. Isn't it just that your third son has entered the College of Mathematics? Why are you so happy? If I remember correctly, your second son is in the Imperial College, right? I didn't see you so happy when he was accepted as a disciple by great scholar Chen. An official couldn't help but say this when he saw his colleague beside him was so happy that he even hummed a tune. It's different, it's different. The official shook his head and said, the Imperial College has already declined. You will know how good the College of Mathematics is in the future. As an official of the Ministry of Revenue, he was fortunate enough to know more things. The path that the first batch of students of the College of Mathematics had to take was not something that could be replicated by future students. If they missed this opportunity, they might not have such a chance in the future. After saying this, he glanced at the person beside him. Seeing that the person was looking behind him without saying a word, he turned around in confusion. The Chancellor of the Imperial College, several officials, and professors were standing there, looking at him coldly. Li Yi was the last to walk out of the hall. He patted the dirt off his buttocks and looked back at the hall. He cursed in his heart before striding out of the palace. Resign? What a good plan. I'm afraid he can't wait for me to dismiss him. Emperor Jing said angrily, other officials share the burden of the emperor, but he did such a thing only a few days after he beat the King of Shu. How can I have such an official? Changde watched from afar without saying a word. If it had been someone else who had done these two things, their head would have been somewhere else. However, His Majesty had only said a few words to vent his anger. In fact, His Majesty would have beheaded anyone but Li Yi. Because of the King of Shu, there had been a force in the court that even His Majesty could not ignore. This was something that no emperor wanted to see. However, His Majesty was the Son of Heaven. His every move was watched by countless people. In many cases, he could only choose to deal with it gently. However, County Uncle Li was different. He did not want money or power. He did not even want to be an official. If he wanted to do something, he would be straightforward and fearless. Resigning was what he wanted, and he did not care about losing his salary. Not only that, but his role was irreplaceable. Today, in the court, even without His Majesty's words, countless officials interceded for him. Among the officials, who could do this? Which emperor would be willing to punish an official who could always accurately guess the emperor's intention and share the burden of the emperor? If he had not abducted His Majesty's 3 favorite princesses these days, His Majesty would not have kicked him on his buttocks just now. Not to mention that he did not get a reward for doing a good deed, he was kicked for no reason. After walking out of the main hall, Li Yi felt a little uncomfortable. He did not let those people enter the college because he did not want to cultivate talents for the king of Shu. The old emperor did not want a certain group to continue to grow. Everyone had the same goal, so they should help each other and work together. Those who got benefits and burned the bridge after crossing the river were all bastards. A figure suddenly jumped out from a corner and tugged at his sleeve, saying, "Let's continue shopping and listening to the opera today. I finished reading the comic strips last time, and I want to buy some new ones. Also, I want the windmill that can spin in Yongning." Father Emperor asked the craftsman in the Ministry of Works to make it. "But compared to the ugly one in your house, I want." Well, after the old tormented him, the young tormented him. Princess Shawning was even worse. The double torture of body and mind made Li Yi feel that his life was dark. The arrogant Lolita wanted to go out of the palace, but she could not do it alone. She must be accompanied by Princess Royal. "You have offended too many people this time. Be careful in the future and bring more guards with you when you go out." Li Yi turned to look at her and asked, "Is assassination also popular in the capital?" "It's never wrong to be careful," Emingzu said. "You have never been in officialdom, so you don't know that they will do anything for their own interests. If they used other dirty tricks, Li Yi might not know how to deal with them." But he did not have to worry about assassination at all. Outsiders with unknown identities could not even get within 10 feet of the Count's mansion. If one came, one would die. If 2 came, 2 would die. When he went out, there was no lack of masters in the palace. He was not afraid even if a grandmaster came, so why should he worry about his safety? "You are going to hold the Heroes' Assembly in the capital?" Princess Royal Highness's thoughts jumped a lot today. Li Yi was a little puzzled, but he still nodded and said, "There is still 1.5 months left." "You want to participate too?" Li Yi looked at her. If she really had this idea, he had to persuade her to give it up as soon as possible. The leader of the alliance was decided internally. For this reason, Mississippi Lu had even invited her second granduncle. As for the others, they just needed to participate and not think too much. "How old is your second daughter?" Princess Royal Highness looked into the distance and asked inexplicably. "How old?" Unexpectedly, Princess Royal Highness's thoughts jumped again. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He really did not know. The key was that he had no concept of this before. But when she taught him how to ride a horse last time, he vaguely felt that it should be B or C. "Why do you ask this?" Li Yi was a little vigilant. It could not be. No wonder Princess Royal Highness had not married yet. It turned out that she liked Mississippi Lu. Princess Royal Highness looked at him and said, "Why, can't you tell me her age?" "So you are talking about age." Li Yi was relieved and said, "Just over 17. He was a little surprised after he said that. What were the 17-year-old girls doing in the future? Each and every one of them was a delicate young girl. They should still be in high school. Looking at Mississippi Lu, when she was 17, she was already competing with countless masters for the leader of the martial arts world, 17 years old. "Didn't you arrange a marriage for her?" Mingzu looked at him and asked. "Marriage? No." Li Yi shook his head. Who would dare to interfere in this matter? Did they want to die? Besides, Mississippi Lu was only 17 years old. She was still a child in the future. If anyone dared to propose marriage, they would break their legs first. However, why would Princess Royal Highness suddenly ask this question? It was really abnormal. Could it be that she really had some improper thoughts about Mississippi Lou? Some images appeared in Li Yi's mind, and his face turned red. Too embarrassing. Chapter 5:12. Why are you suddenly asking about this? Li Yi felt that he had to get to the bottom of this. Why did the princess suddenly come out of the closet? Moreover, the one she came out of the closet to was Second Lady Lu. This was a bit difficult to handle. It was hard to say whether Second Lady Lu would agree or not, but Rui would definitely not agree. It's because they are all forcing my royal sister to get married. Princess Shaoning interrupted. Li Yi was stunned. Only then did he realize that the princess was a few months older than Mississippi Lu. According to the customs of the royal family, princesses would be married off after the age of 14. It was very rare for a princess to be married off until the age of 18. The reason why she returned to the capital early from Qing'an Prefecture was because she was seen by the censor. The entire censorate was in an uproar, and at the same time, her marriage was put on the table. However, when Li Yi came to the capital, the matter had already been suppressed. It seemed that it was being brought up again now. What's so troublesome about it? Li Yi looked at her and said, who hasn't been forced to get married before? It's not a big deal. Thinking back to the time when he had to deal with his mother who was forcing him to get married, he had used all sorts of methods. Compared to his mother who was professional and forcing him to get married, the censor was nothing. You have a way. Mingzhu looked at him, her eyes shining. How difficult can it be? Li Yi waved his hand and said, become a monk or come out of the closet, you can choose one. Come out of the closet? Her Royal Highness knew what it meant to become a monk, but she didn't quite understand the last word that Li Yi said. Li Yi shook his head and said, don't look at me. Even if I agree, Rui will not agree. You can't beat her. Seeing that she was still looking at him, Li Yi was stunned. His expression became even more vigilant and he immediately added, I can't either. I have a family. Besides, people of the same surname cannot marry. Your idea is very dangerous. What is coming out of the closet? Her Royal Highness continued to ask. Forget it, just pretend I didn't say anything. Li Yi waved his hand and said, become a monk, understand? His Majesty is ill. As the eldest princess, shouldn't you pray for His Majesty? Eat vegetarian and pray to Buddha, do good every day. No, your Li family believes in Buddhism, so you should sincerely cultivate Taoism and do good deeds. As long as His Majesty's health is not good, you should not return to secular life. Li Yi looked at her and said, I promise that in this way, those censors will not dare to say anything. The entire court, including His Majesty, will not say anything. In order to pray for His Majesty, Her Royal Highness was willing to become a nun with her noble status. How filial was this? The imperial censors could not wait to praise her. If anyone dared to speak carelessly and cause trouble, the old emperor would not even need to do anything. The spit of the people in the world would drown them to death. The princess looked at him with a slightly hesitant expression. Li Yi continued, of course, it's easy to become a nun, but it's hard to return to secular life. If you don't like this method, it's okay. We have a plan B. His Majesty is ill and powerful enemies are eyeing him covetously. The country is suffering from internal and external troubles. As the eldest princess of the country, she worries about His Majesty and the affairs of the country. As she worries more and more, she becomes ill and becomes intermittent hysteria. When she is ill, she likes to draw her sword and cut people. She won't stop until she sees blood. In this way, no one will dare to marry you. Li Yi was very experienced in this matter. All the civil and military officials in the court knew that Uncle Li suffered from intermittent hysteria. He would go crazy when he was stimulated. Her Royal Highness was so close to him that it was normal for her to get this disease accidentally. Don't worry that no one will believe it. I'm familiar with the Imperial Physician Bureau. It's very easy to make a certificate. You've already used this method, and Mingzhu looked at him and said. It's because I've used it before that it works. Seeing that she didn't seem to like this method, Li Yi thought for a while and said, if you don't like the first two methods, you can only use plan C. Which censor is the most troublesome? Hire some assassins to kill him. Li Yi looked at her and gently scratched his neck with one hand. He said, what do you think? Simple and violent. Once and for all. Are you very tempted? These are the methods. You decide which one to use. When the princess was thinking, Li Yi reminded her, anyway, everything should be done as soon as possible. It will be too late when His Majesty makes a decision. No matter how much the old emperor doted on her, he couldn't keep her in the palace forever. There was no doubt about this. There was no custom for princesses to marry outside the Jing kingdom. Under normal circumstances, princesses would marry the sons of some important officials or marry rich families. There would be some political factors in it. Of course, free love existed in this era, but most of it happened in small families. Young ladies with a bit of status couldn't decide their own marriage. Princesses were no exception. Princess Shining finished her candied fruit and wiped her mouth. She said, all girls have to get married. Mother said that I should get married in 2 years. Li Yi was stunned and almost fell down the stairs. How old was that Tsundere Lolita? She wasn't even 11 yet? Even if she was 11, she would only be 13 in 2 years. She had to get married and have children at the age of 13? Damn it, this was too much of a beast. Ahem, actually, it's not good to get married too early. Li Yi coughed softly. He felt that it was time to teach them some knowledge that girls should know. Giving birth too early will cause irreversible damage to a woman's body. At the age of 14 or 15, she is still a child. Her body hasn't matured yet. Dystocia is common. It's not uncommon to have 2 lives. If you don't believe me, you can ask any midwife. In this era, giving birth was tantamount to a parting of life and death. The question of whether to save the mother or the child was not a joke. Speaking of giving birth, the Tsundere Lolita was still a little shy. However, after listening to Li Yi, her shyness quickly turned into fear. Her little face turned pale. She didn't know that giving birth was so scary. She decided to go back and persuade her mother to listen to her husband. She didn't want to get married in 2 years. Actually, within the royal family, in order to strengthen ties, they often conduct marriages between cousins. Li Yi looked at Her Royal Highness and said, have you noticed that the descendants of these marriages between cousins are often stupid and disabled? Li Mingzu thought about it and showed some surprise on her face. She asked, why? This involves the problem of genes and inheritance. Li Yi found that he had said a little too much today. If he continued, he was afraid that the old emperor would ask him to build a biology school again. Li Yi looked at her and said, let me give you a simple example. Do you know that there are people in this world who don't distinguish between red and green? Note, not distinguishing between red and green doesn't mean that they don't recognize red and green. This is a misunderstanding that many people have about red and green color blindness, from an author who has been professionally colorblind for 20 years. Li Mingzu nodded and said, it's not a secret in the capital that Prince Cheng and Princess Cheng don't distinguish between red and green. Since she knew that there was such a thing, then the problem of inheritance was easily explained. For the time being, we will call the disease of not distinguishing between red and green color blindness. If Prince Cheng and Princess Cheng both have color blindness, then the children of the two, regardless of gender, will definitely have color blindness. This is inherited. Li Yi used the most simple language to explain to her. Only by explaining this matter clearly could he explain the problem of, the royal family is full of idiots. Li Mingzu looked at him in surprise and said, but, the young princess, does not have color blindness. Li Yi's expression froze. Chapter 513. Young princess, you don't have color blindness? Li Yi finally came to his senses. He looked at Li Mingzhu and asked, are you sure? Mingzhu looked at him and nodded. Li Yi coughed twice, as if he saw sheep and sheep running on the green grassland. He rubbed his eyebrows and asked, "Where were we?" "Heredity." The princess reminded him. "Oh, heredity. Let's talk about heredity next time." "I'm a bit confused now." Li Yi couldn't understand the heredity of the royal family. He shook his head and said, "In short, the consequences of marriage between cousins are more serious than marriage between people with the same surname. In fact, if there is no blood relationship, it's not really impossible to get married just because they have the same surname. It's just an unfounded taboo of marriage." "Really?" Before Princess Royal Highness said anything, the proud Lolita's eyes suddenly lit up. Li Yi glanced at her and didn't know what she was happy about. "Is it really so dangerous to get married too early?" Mingzu looked at him with an incredulous expression. Li Yi looked at her and said, "In fact, you just need to go to the Imperial Physicians Bureau and you will know the mortality rate of women giving birth nowadays. A major reason is that the childbearing age is too young. The pelvis is not fully grown, so the fetus can't give birth smoothly. Often, 2 lives are lost." He was not exaggerating. There was data that showed that the mortality rate of pregnant women in ancient times was 30 to 40%. Giving birth was no less than a separation of life and death. Of course, there were reasons for this, such as the underdeveloped medical level and poor awareness of hygiene, but early marriage and early childbearing was definitely the most important factor. However, the national conditions were like this. The people thought that having more children would bring more blessings. The officials wanted to improve their performance. If they didn't want to have children, they would help them. The king wanted more people, so the legal age of marriage was lowered again and again. Under such a major premise, if women in the Jing kingdom were still unmarried at the age of 17 or 18, what would happen? Li Yi couldn't change this kind of thing, but Her Royal Highness was different. She was a woman and the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom. Her mother was the current empress, the chairwoman of the Women's Federation and the chairwoman of the Women's Committee of the Jing kingdom. She was the motherly model of the world. It was their responsibility to seek for the welfare of women. That's right, his underwear store was about to open. Should he send a few pieces to the palace to set the trend? "I'm going to the Imperial Physicians Bureau now." Li Yi's words made her extremely frightened, so she stopped and said, "Ah. I'm not leaving the palace." The proud Lolita had a disappointed look on her face, but she knew that her royal sister had something important to do, so she said with a bitter face, "Let's wait until tomorrow." Mingzu said, then she turned around and hurriedly walked towards the direction of the Imperial Physicians Bureau. Watching Her Royal Highness leave, Li Yi was about to go home when the Tsundere Lolita grabbed his sleeve. "I can't take you out of the palace," Li Yi said helplessly. Abducting the princess of a kingdom was a serious crime. Without the approval of the old emperor, the imperial guards at the entrance of the palace had the power to execute him on the spot. I want to ask you a question." The Tsundere Lolita looked down at her toes and said with a red face. Go ahead." She didn't even call him Mr. It seemed that her question wouldn't be easy to answer. "Did you just say that people with the same surname can get married?" The Tsundere Lolita said in a low voice. "Same sex. It should be possible." Li Yi thought for a while, then nodded and said, "Liking men or liking women was a person's freedom, and others had no right to interfere." As a young man with advanced thinking, Li Yi wasn't gay, and he didn't care if others were gay or not. Then can I marry you in the future?" The Tsundere Lolita suddenly raised her head and looked at Li Yi with her eyes wide open. Since she was going to get married in the future, why not marry Mr.? If she married Mr., she would have endless delicious food to eat and fun to play. She could go shopping and listen to plays. She could see all kinds of strange things. Being by Mr.'s side would be much more fun than being in the palace. She had never thought about this before. Just now, she seriously thought about it. Marrying Mr. should be the happiest thing in this world, right? What? At that moment, Li Yi felt like he was struck by lightning. He felt a little confused. What did the Tsundere Lolita just say? Marry me? Are all the girls in the palace so mature? What a joke. Although he was a beast. Bah. No matter how much of a beast he was, he wouldn't have such thoughts about an 11-year-old girl. Besides, if this was known by the old emperor, he could only go to the palace as soon as possible. If he was a little slower, he would have to go to the market to find him. No matter what the reason was, he couldn't agree to it. He straightened his body, looked at her, and sternly said, "No." That Tsundere Lolita was stunned on the spot. The look of anticipation on her small face quickly dimmed. Her eyes were covered with a layer of mist, and her small mouth was pouting. Li Yi walked out of the palace gate dejectedly. That Tsundere Lolita's sudden action had caught him off guard. Thinking of her sad appearance as she left, he actually felt that he had become a heartless man. God, what did he do? He clearly didn't do anything. What the F***ck is going on? Milord, milord? Xiao Huan. He turned around and looked at the little servant girl. Son-in-law, I'm here. Xiao Huan was refreshed and immediately sat up straight. Son-in-law is very likable, isn't he? Li Yi looked at her and asked seriously. The little servant girl was stunned for a moment. After a moment, she carefully stretched out her hand and touched Li Yi's forehead. After withdrawing her hand, she immediately turned around and ran back to the room. Miss, it's bad. Son-in-law is sick. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.